Hey guys, you are watching your anime world. How are you all? Please support to subscribe this channel for watching new interesting stories. So in this video, we will see what if Deku became Mei Hatsume's new obsession. Here is short summary. Mei Hatsume, once obsessed only with her inventions, begins to develop unexpected feelings for Izuku after they teamed up during the UA Sports Festival. Initially confused, she delves deeper into this mysterious subject matter that has her shifting her focus from creating to investigating the boy that has captured her fully undivided attention and entering the realm of love. But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible, share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. The roar of the crowd echoed through the stadium as the UA Sports Festival reached its climax. The arena was alive with energy, with students and spectators alike caught up in the excitement. Among the competitors, Mei Hatsume stood out, not for her physical prowess, but for her dazzling array of gadgets, her babies, as she affectionately called them. During the obstacle race, Mei had found a perfect opportunity to showcase her inventions to the pro heroes in the audience. And she had the perfect guinea pig for it, Izuku Midoriya, the determined but somewhat frazzled student who had just barely secured his place in the competition. To Mei, Izuku was just another student, another means to an end. She didn't care much about his quirks or his ambitions, only that he could put her gadgets to the test in front of the biggest audience possible. She saw him more as a walking advertisement than a fellow competitor. "Hey, Midoriya," Mei called out, her voice cutting through the chaos of the festival. She zipped over to him on a hoverboard, one of her newest creations. "I've got some amazing babies that'll give you a serious edge in the cavalry battle. What do you say?" Izuku, always one to help out a friend or classmate, agreed without hesitation. "Sure, Hatsume, I'd be happy to help." As the battle unfolded, Mei guided Izuku and his team, deploying her inventions at every critical moment. From jetpacks to grappling hooks, her gadgets allowed Izuku to outmaneuver the competition in ways that surprised even him. But to Mei, it was all about the tech. She watched the pros in the stands, eagerly awaiting their reactions to her creations, barely noticing Izuku's tireless efforts. After the festival ended and the excitement died down, Mei returned to her workshop, diving back into her inventions. Her mind was consumed by new ideas and improvements, the adrenaline from the festival fueling her creative drive. Izuku, however, was just another successful test run, a distant memory as she focused on her work. But as weeks turned into months, Mei found herself thinking back to the festival more often than she expected. She would be deep in her work, fine-tuning a piece of equipment, and suddenly a thought of Izuku would surface: how determined he had been, how earnest in his desire to help others, and how well he had adapted to her inventions. His praise of her gadgets had been so genuine, so heartfelt, that it had caught her off guard. At first, she dismissed these thoughts as distractions, mere background noise in her relentless pursuit of innovation. But they persisted, creeping into her mind during late-night sessions in the lab and quiet moments when she should have been focusing on her next breakthrough. It wasn't until she was working on a new prototype, a pair of enhanced gloves designed to improve a hero's grip and control, that she realized just how often she was thinking of him. The gloves were modeled after some of the modifications she had made for Izuku during the festival, and as she tinkered with them, she couldn't help but remember his smile, his awkward yet endearing thanks, and his unyielding spirit. "Why am I thinking about him so much?" Mei wondered aloud, adjusting the tension on a tiny spring. It was a rare moment of introspection for her, usually so consumed by her inventions that she had little time for self-reflection. She shrugged it off, attributing it to her natural obsession with improving her designs. Despite her attempts to push the thoughts away, they continued to linger, slowly growing stronger. She found herself paying more attention to Izuku when she saw him around school, noticing the way he interacted with others, how he never hesitated to lend a hand, and how his determination never seemed to waver. Mei didn't fully understand what was happening. She was too dedicated to her craft, too focused on her passion for technology to fully grasp the emotions that were beginning to stir within her. But every time she thought of Izuku, a small, unfamiliar warmth began to grow in her chest, something different from the excitement she felt for her inventions, something new and uncharted. She didn't know it yet, but the seeds of something deeper had been planted, waiting to take root and grow. And so, as she continued her work, lost in the world of gears and circuits, Mei remained blissfully unaware of the quiet transformation taking place within her, her mind still preoccupied with her babies, yet her heart beginning to turn toward a new focus, one that she would soon find impossible to ignore. The lab buzzed with the hum of machinery as Mei worked tirelessly on her latest project. Scattered around her were blueprints, wires, and half-finished prototypes, each one a testament to her relentless creativity. Today, she was particularly engrossed in developing a new piece of technology, a compact energy source that could drastically enhance the power output of her inventions. It was a delicate piece of equipment, highly unstable, but Mei was confident in her ability to perfect it. As she carefully soldered a connection, her thoughts began to wander once more. She hadn't seen much of Izuku recently, and despite herself, she started to miss the way he would enthusiastically test her inventions or thank her with that bright, genuine smile. The memory of him, his determined green eyes and awkward yet endearing demeanor, crept into her mind, distracting her just as she was about to adjust a critical component. Midoriya would probably love this if it works, she mused aloud, a small smile playing on her lips. She had even actually bothered to remember his name and face, a trait she deeply lacked and did not care to improve. But in that moment of distraction, her hand slipped, and the unstable energy source sparked violently. Mei's eyes widened as the device began to overheat, glowing with a dangerous intensity. She barely had time to react before it exploded with a loud bang, sending her flying backward through the lab. She crashed through the double doors, the force of the explosion hurling her into the hallway. Disoriented, she landed on something solid yet soft. As she regained her senses, Mei adjusted her goggles, the lenses slightly cracked from the blast. She looked down to see what had broken her fall. To her surprise, she found herself sprawled atop Izuku, who had apparently been on his way to visit her lab. He lay beneath her, his face a deep shade of red, eyes wide with shock. "Oh, hey, Midoriya." Mei greeted him cheerfully, as if nothing out of the ordinary had just happened. She beamed down at him, completely unaware of the compromising position she was in. Izuku, on the other hand, was utterly petrified. His heart raced as he realized how close Mei was, her body pressed against his, her hands resting on his chest, and her face mere inches from his. But what really sent his brain into overdrive was the fact that her full-bosomed beeps were happily pressing down on his own chest. The light texture of her dirty tank top did little to conceal their perfect shape from the physical contact. He also got the perfect view of her cleavage, adding to his state of panic. "Ha Hatsume," Izuku stammered, his voice barely a whisper as he tried to find the right words. He was too embarrassed to move, his mind became a chaotic swirl of thoughts. Mei, however, was completely oblivious to his distress. "What a lucky coincidence," she exclaimed, her grin as wide as ever. "I was just working on something super cool, and I was thinking about you when, boom. It kinda blew up in my face. But don't worry, I'll fix it." She remained on top of him, still talking excitedly about her project, as if this was the most normal thing in the world. Izuku, meanwhile, was desperately trying to maintain his composure, his hands awkwardly hovering above the ground, unsure of where to place them. Hatsume," he managed to squeak out, his voice strained, "see could you, maybe." It was only then that Mei noticed their position. She tilted her head slightly, her hair brushing against his face, and looked down at him quizzically. "Oh, am I hurting you?" she asked, finally catching on but still missing the point. Before Izuku could respond, Mei leaned in closer, her face now almost touching his as she examined him for injuries. "You don't look hurt. Maybe I cushioned the fall," she mused aloud, completely unaware of the effect her proximity was having on him. Izuku's mind was a whirlwind. He wanted to get up, to say something, but his body refused to cooperate. The warmth of her body against his, the scent of her hair, and her casual demeanor despite the situation, it was all too much for him to handle. Finally, with a slight blush of realization creeping into her own cheeks, Mei chuckled. "Oh, I get it. You're shy, aren't you? No worries, Midoriya, she said, still smiling as she finally rolled off him and stood up, brushing off dust off herself as if nothing had happened. Izuku scrambled to his feet, his face still burning with embarrassment. I was just coming to check on you. He blurted out, his voice shaky. I heard a loud noise and thought. Mei waved her hand dismissively. Just a minor setback. It happens sometimes when you're pushing the limits of science. She grinned, completely unfazed by the near disaster. But you came at the perfect time. I was just thinking about how you could help me test this new energy source once I get it stabilized. Izuku, still trying to steady his breathing, nodded slowly. Sure, Hatsume, anything I can do to help. As they walked back into the lab together, Mei's mind was already racing with new ideas for improving her prototype. But for a brief moment, as she glanced sideways at Izuku, she felt that unfamiliar warmth in her chest again. It was stronger this time, more noticeable, but still something she couldn't fully understand. She brushed it off as excitement for her next invention, but deep down, a part of her was starting to wonder if it might be something more. Something she wasn't quite ready to admit, even to herself. As Mei led Izuku back into the lab, she was met with the sight of utter chaos. The explosion had left the room in disarray, tools scattered across the floor, a few prototypes smoldering, and a thick layer of dust coating everything. The energy source she had been working on was now nothing more than a twisted, charred mess on the workbench. Mei, however, was unfazed. To her, this was just another day in the lab, a minor setback on the road to innovation. She adjusted her goggles and began assessing the damage with a focused expression, already thinking of how to improve the design for next time. Izuku, still feeling the lingering embarrassment from their earlier encounter, watched as she effortlessly moved through the wreckage. Despite the chaos, there was something undeniably impressive about her single-minded dedication. But before he could offer to help clean up, the door to the lab burst open, and Power Loader, the teacher in charge of the development studio, stormed in. Hatsume. Power Loader's voice boomed through the lab, his mechanical arms waving in frustration. What in the world happened here? You can't keep pushing these dangerous experiments without proper safety protocols. This is a school, not a demolition site. Mei barely acknowledged him, her attention already fixed on a set of damaged circuits she was fiddling with. It's fine, she mumbled absent-mindedly, her mind clearly elsewhere. Just a little mishap, I'll have it all fixed up in no time. Power Loader's patience was clearly wearing thin. Hatsume, you need to start taking these safety concerns seriously. You could have injured yourself, or someone else. I'm shutting down the lab for the rest of the day. This finally got Mei's attention. She paused her work, her eyes widening in genuine surprise. Wait, what? But I'm right in the middle of. No buts. Power Loader interrupted, his tone firm. You're done for today. I want you out of here, now. Mei opened her mouth to protest, but before she could say anything, Power Loader pointed toward the door. With a huff, she begrudgingly complied, grabbing a small toolbox and heading out. Izuku followed her, casting an apologetic glance at Power Loader as they exited the lab. Once they were outside, Mei let out a frustrated sigh, kicking at a loose piece of debris on the ground. Can you believe that? Right when I was on the verge of a breakthrough. She shook her head, still fuming. But then, her mood shifted almost immediately as she turned to Izuku with a bright smile. Hey, since we've got some time now, how about we test out those new prototype gloves I've been working on? I've made some upgrades, and I'd love to see how they perform in the field. Izuku hesitated, feeling a bit torn. He appreciated Mei's enthusiasm, but he already had plans. Actually, Hatsume, he began, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly, I'm really sorry, but I already promised to meet up with Uraraka this afternoon. We're supposed to train together. Mei blinked at him, the name clearly not registering. Uraraka, who's that? Izuku chuckled nervously. You know, Ochako Uraraka. My classmate, the one with the gravity quirk. Mei squinted, trying to recall, but she was drawing a blank. She was so absorbed in her work that the faces and names of other students often blurred together. Oh, her, she said slowly, still not entirely sure who he was talking about. But then, something clicked. Wait, is she a girl? Mei asked, her tone neutral but with a hint of curiosity. Izuku nodded, not picking up on the subtle shift in her demeanor. Yeah, she's a close friend of mine. We've been training together a lot recently. Unexpectedly, a strange emotion began to stir within Mei. It was an unfamiliar sensation for her, something she had rarely, if ever, felt before. She was used to being so focused on her inventions that she never paid much attention to personal relationships. But the thought of Izuku spending time with another girl, someone who wasn't a guinea pig for her gadgets, but an actual friend, sparked a twinge of something she didn't quite understand. Mei's brow furrowed as she tried to process this new feeling. Oh, I see, she said, her voice slightly less enthusiastic than before. She wasn't sure why, but the idea of Izuku hanging out with someone else, someone he clearly cared about, bothered her more than she expected. She brushed it off quickly, not wanting to dwell on it. Well, maybe another time then, she said, forcing a smile. The gloves will be ready whenever you are. Izuku, oblivious to the internal struggle Mei was experiencing, smiled back, relieved that she wasn't upset. Thanks, Hatsume, I appreciate it. I'll definitely take you up on that offer soon. As he waved goodbye and headed off to meet Ochako, Mei watched him go, a strange tightness in her chest. She tried to shake off the feeling, telling herself it was nothing, just a passing thought. But as she stood there, alone in the hallway, she couldn't help but feel a little less excited about returning to her workshop. This was new territory for her, emotions she wasn't used to dealing with. For the first time, her thoughts weren't entirely consumed by her inventions. And as she walked away, heading to the dorms instead of her lab for once, she couldn't help but wonder why the idea of Izuku spending time with someone else made her feel so unsettled. For the past 4 days, Mei had been in a state of complete and utter frustration. Her normally bustling workshop had fallen silent, her half-finished projects gathering dust as she found herself unable to concentrate. Every time she tried to work on a new invention, her mind would draw a frustrating blank, leaving her staring at a mess of wires and circuits with no idea where to begin. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Creativity and innovation had always come naturally to her. Her mind was usually a constant whirlwind of ideas, always racing ahead to the next big breakthrough. But now, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't focus. It was as if something was blocking her inspiration, and it was driving her crazy. Sitting at her cluttered workbench, Mei let out a loud groan, rubbing her temples in an attempt to clear her mind. What is wrong with me? She muttered, glaring at the unresponsive gadgets in front of her as if they were the ones to blame. She had even started avoiding the lab, spending most of her time aimlessly wandering around the school grounds or lying on her bed, staring at the ceiling. This lack of productivity was unacceptable to her, and the longer it went on, the more annoyed she became. She was Mei Hatsume, genius inventor extraordinaire. She couldn't afford to waste time like this. As she sat there, trying to figure out what had caused this sudden block, her thoughts kept circling back to the same moment, the day Izuku had come to visit her lab. The day she had blown herself up, quite literally, on top of him. Her cheeks flushed slightly at the memory, but she quickly shook her head, dismissing the thought. No, it has to be something else, she reasoned aloud, though she wasn't entirely convinced. But as she replayed the events in her mind, she realized that everything had started going wrong after that day. Her distraction, the explosion, and then the strange feeling she had when Izuku mentioned he was meeting up with his female friend, whatever her name had been. Mei bit her lip, frowning as she leaned back in her chair. It doesn't make sense, she said to herself, trying to piece together the puzzle. Why would thinking about Midoriya mess with my creativity? But no matter how she looked at it, the timing was too coincidental. Ever since that encounter, her thoughts had been drawn to him more and more frequently. At first, she had brushed it off as simple curiosity. After all, he was always an interesting guinea pig for her inventions. But now, it was clear that something else was at play. After much internal deliberation, Mei finally came to a conclusion. It must be because I never gave him those prototype gauntlets, she declared, standing up with sudden determination. That's it. I've been so distracted because I didn't finish what I started. She convinced herself that completing this task would put her mind at ease and allow her creativity to return. After all, when had she ever let an unfinished project get in the way of her work? Grabbing the nearly completed gauntlets from the shelf, Mei felt a surge of energy as she made a few final adjustments. She could feel that warmth in her chest again, the one she had been trying to ignore. The idea of seeing Izuku, handing him the gauntlets, and watching his face light up with excitement, it made her smile in a way she didn't entirely understand. Without wasting any more time, she slipped on her goggles and headed out of the workshop, the gauntlets safely tucked under her arm. She didn't bother checking where Izuku might be. She was determined to find him, even if it meant searching the entire campus. As she made her way through the hallways, her mind raced with thoughts of how to present the gauntlets to him. Maybe she'd have him test them out right then and there. Maybe she'd ask for his feedback on how to improve them further. But as she neared the common areas of the school, a small part of her, one she wasn't ready to acknowledge just yet, was simply eager to see him again. She wanted to see that bright, determined smile, to hear him speak with that earnest tone about how her inventions could help him become a better hero. Mei paused for a moment, standing in the middle of the hallway as she realized just how much she was looking forward to it. Her heart fluttered slightly at the thought, and she frowned, trying to suppress the feeling. This is just about the gauntlets, she reminded herself firmly, continuing her search. Nothing more. But deep down, she knew it wasn't just about the gauntlets. Something had changed, something that had her feeling more than just the thrill of invention. And as she continued her search for Izuku, she couldn't help but wonder if, maybe, this strange new feeling was the key to unlocking not only her creativity but something else entirely. Determined and a bit nervous, Mei pushed forward, her eyes scanning every corner as she searched for the green-haired boy who had unexpectedly become the center of her thoughts. As Mei hurried through the hallways, her mind laser-focused on finding Izuku, she almost ran headlong into someone coming around the corner. She skidded to a stop just in time, her goggles slipping slightly down her nose as she caught herself. Standing before her was Tenya Iida, his usual stern expression replaced by one of mild surprise as he adjusted his glasses, regaining his composure. "Hatsume," he greeted, his voice carrying that distinct air of formality. But there was a trace of wariness in his tone, as if he wasn't entirely pleased to see her. Mei blinked at him, tilting her head in mild confusion. "Do I know you?" she asked bluntly, completely oblivious to the growing irritation on Iida's face. Iida's eyes widened in disbelief, and he took a step back, pointing at himself as if to remind her of who he was. "It's me, Iida, Tenya Iida, Class 1A representative. You used me as a human advertisement during the sports festival," Iida finished, his tone exasperated. "You strapped all those gadgets to me and made me run around like a walking billboard for your inventions. It was humiliating." Mei stared at him blankly for a moment before a small flicker of recognition crossed her face. "Oh, right, you're that guy with the engines in your legs, aren't you?" She shrugged nonchalantly, clearly unbothered by his annoyance. "Sorry, I've been busy with, actual important stuff." Iida was left momentarily speechless, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find the words to respond. He couldn't believe that she had not only forgotten who he was but also seemed completely unrepentant about the whole ordeal. You don't even remember my name," he finally managed to ask, his voice tinged with disbelief. Mei waved a hand dismissively. "Names aren't really my thing," she said, already shifting her attention back to her main objective. "Hey, have you seen Midoriya around?" The sudden change of subject threw Iida off balance, and he stared at her in confusion. "Midoriya, why are you looking for him?" "I need to give him something," Mei said simply, holding up the prototype gauntlets as if that explained everything. "Where is he?" Iida let out a deep sigh, clearly fighting the urge to lecture her about basic manners and social interaction. Instead, he pointed down the hallway, toward the school's training facility. "He should be at the training grounds right now. He mentioned something about sparring with Uraraka earlier." Mei's eyes lit up with a bright smile, entirely missing Iida's growing frustration. "Great, thanks, glasses boy," she chirped, already turning on her heel and hurrying off in the direction he had pointed. Iida was left standing in the hallway, his shoulders slumping in defeat as he watched her go. It's Iida. Not glasses, he muttered to himself, rubbing his temples as he tried to push back his exasperation. As Mei rounded the corner, heading toward the training facility, her mind was once again filled with thoughts of Izuku. She didn't dwell on her brief encounter with Iida. He was just another person in the background of her life, another name and face that didn't stick. What mattered was finding Izuku, giving him the gauntlets, and, hopefully, getting back to her usual creative self. But as she drew closer to the training grounds, that strange warmth in her chest began to grow, and she couldn't quite shake the feeling that this wasn't just about the gauntlets anymore. Something else was driving her, something she wasn't fully ready to confront. And as she neared the door to the training facility, her heart started to beat just a little faster, anticipation and curiosity mingling together in a way she hadn't expected. The sound of explosions echoed through the air as Mei approached the training grounds, her goggles reflecting the flashes of light from the ongoing combat. The smell of burnt metal and the sight of training robots being torn apart made her heart race, but it wasn't just the spectacle of destruction that had her on edge. As she stepped closer, she spotted the source of the chaos, Katsuki Bakugo, gleefully obliterating robots with his relentless blasts, a feral grin on his face. But it wasn't Bakugo that held Mei's attention. Just a little further away, she saw Izuku moving with swift precision, using his legs to deliver powerful kicks to the robots, dismantling them with calculated force. His movements were fluid, each strike deliberate and controlled. There was something about watching him in action that made her shiver, a strange sensation that spread through her body and left her feeling unsteady on her feet. Mei stood there, captivated, as she watched Izuku train. Her heart pounded in her chest, her earlier frustration forgotten as she observed his focus, his determination. He looked different from how she usually saw him. Less like the curious guinea pig she was used to and more like a powerful hero in the making. The realization sent another shiver down her spine, one she couldn't quite explain. Just as she was lost in thought, a voice called out to her, breaking her reverie. "Hatsume, what are you doing here?" Mei turned her head to see a brunette donning the school's gym uniform approaching, her expression friendly but tinged with curiosity. Ochako's eyes flickered to the gauntlets in Mei's hands, then back to her face. "Are you here to see Midoriya?" Mei nodded, trying to keep her voice steady as she answered. "Yeah, I have something for him." Ochako's friendly demeanor shifted slightly, her brows furrowing as she looked Mei up and down. "What do you want with him?" There was an edge to Ochako's voice that Mei couldn't quite place, but it made her pause. For the first time, she noticed the way Ochako was standing, her posture protective and slightly defensive. It was like she was guarding something, or someone. Mei blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. "I just need to give him these gauntlets," she said, holding them up as if that explained everything. "That's it. Then I can go back to my workshop." Ochako's frown deepened, and she opened her mouth as if to say something else, but before she could, Izuku's voice cut through the tension. "Uraraka, Hatsume." Mei's heart skipped a beat as she heard him call Ochako's name first, but she quickly pushed the feeling aside. Izuku jogged over to them, his face flushed from exertion but brightened by a wide smile. "What are you doing here, Hatsume?" As he approached, Mei suddenly felt very self-conscious. The warmth that had spread through her chest earlier was now mingled with something else, something heavy and uncomfortable. She glanced at Ochako, who was standing next to her, and suddenly became acutely aware of the girl's presence. So, she was the one that stolen his attention from her some days back. The one Izuku always seemed to be around, the one he liked hanging out with. When Izuku reached them, his cheerful expression made Mei's heart flutter, but she quickly swallowed the feeling. She wanted to give him the gauntlets, say a few words about how to use them, and then leave. That was the plan. But now, standing here in front of him with Ochako so close by, Mei felt her confidence slipping away. Izuku tilted his head slightly, noticing the awkward silence. "Hatsume." Mei forced a smile, but it felt hollow, even to her. Without saying a word, she handed him the gauntlets, her hands trembling slightly as she did. Izuku looked at the gauntlets in surprise, then back at Mei, confused by her sudden change in demeanor. "Thanks, but," he started, but Mei had already turned away, her mind swirling with a fix of emotions she couldn't fully comprehend. She couldn't stay there, not with this strange, unsettling feeling gnawing at her insides. I have to go," she muttered, her voice barely audible as she walked away, each step faster than the last. "Hatsume, wait," Izuku called after her, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. If she did, she might just lose control of the confusion, the envy, and the strange fear that was clawing at her heart. As she left the training grounds and stepped outside, Mei found a quiet spot against the side of the building. She leaned against the wall, trying to steady her breathing, but the emotions she had tried to push down were now surging to the surface. With a shaky breath, she clutched at her chest, her heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with excitement. "What's wrong with me?" she whispered, her voice trembling as she tried to make sense of it all. She had never felt like this before, this overwhelming mix of want, jealousy, and fear all tangled together, making it impossible to focus on anything else. It was Izuku. It had to be him. Ever since that day in the lab, ever since she had found herself thinking about him more and more, she had felt this strange, unfamiliar pull. But now, it was stronger than ever, and it scared her. Because for the first time in her life, Mei Hatsume, the inventor who had always been so sure of herself and her goals, didn't know what to do. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath as she tried to calm the storm of emotions inside her. But as she stood there, leaning against the cool stone wall, she knew one thing for certain: this wasn't going to be as simple as finishing a project or handing over a pair of gauntlets. This was something deeper, something that wasn't going to go away no matter how hard she tried to ignore it. The weeks that followed were unlike any Mei had experienced before. Her once single-minded focus on her inventions had been completely derailed. Instead of working on her babies, as she affectionately called her creations, she found herself fixated on something, or rather, someone, entirely different. Izuku Midoriya. Since that day at the training grounds, Mei had begun monitoring Izuku's every move, trying to decipher what it was about him that had captivated her so deeply. She'd never been one to dwell on emotions, her life always revolving around her work and the endless possibilities of support technology. But now, there was something new driving her, something she didn't fully understand yet but couldn't ignore. She started keeping a small notebook dedicated solely to Izuku, meticulously documenting his habits, his quirks, and even his interactions with others. It began with simple observations: how often he trained, the way he helped his classmates, the way he muttered to himself when deep in thought. But as time went on, her notes grew more detailed, more personal. She studied the way he smiled, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about being a hero, and the way he carried himself with a determination that was both inspiring and endearing. It was invasive, she knew that much, but Mei couldn't help herself. Every time she saw him, that strange burning joy in her chest returned, stronger than ever. It was as if just watching him filled her with a warmth that nothing else could, a warmth she had never known before. And the more she observed him, the more she realized how much she loved that sensation. At her workbench, where she used to spend hours tinkering with gadgets and prototypes, she now found herself doodling his name, sketching his face, and losing herself in daydreams about him. The shift in her focus was bizarre, even to her. She'd always prided herself on her dedication to her craft, but now, Izuku had become her primary subject of interest, and she didn't know how to stop. She didn't want to stop. Every time she thought of him, she smiled. She imagined them talking, hanging out together, maybe even working on something as a team. The thought of it made her heart race, and she couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to be close to him, to have him notice her not just as the eccentric inventor, but as something more. Then, one day, while quietly tailing him around campus, Mei overheard something that made her heart leap with excitement. Izuku was talking with Denki and a few others about plans for the weekend, mentioning that they were going to the mall to pick up some supplies and maybe grab a bite to eat. The idea of seeing him outside of school, away from the usual environment, filled Mei with a sense of anticipation she hadn't felt before. She decided then and there that she would follow him to the mall, just to see what he was like in a more relaxed setting. It wasn't about being intrusive, she told herself, but about understanding. Understanding what it was about Izuku that made her feel this way, and why she couldn't seem to get him out of her mind. As the weekend approached, Mei's excitement grew. She prepared herself, making sure she had everything she might need, and even dressed a bit differently than usual, something casual, but still practical, in case she needed to blend in. Her cheeks flushed. Here she was, actually bothering to dress up for a boy no less. It felt odd yet exhilarating. When Saturday finally arrived, she set out for the mall early, determined to stay hidden but close enough to watch him. When she arrived at the shopping mall, Mei positioned herself near one of the entrances, her heart pounding with a mix of nerves and exhilaration. She felt a strange thrill coursing through her, knowing that soon she would see him, that soon she would be near him again. When Izuku finally arrived with his friends, laughing and talking as they made their way inside, Mei couldn't help but smile. There he was, the boy who had somehow managed to turn her world upside down, the boy who had become the center of her thoughts, her feelings, her very purpose. As she tailed him through the mall, careful to stay out of sight, Mei felt a sense of satisfaction, almost as if this was exactly where she was meant to be. Watching him from a distance, she could feel that burning joy in her heart, stronger than ever. It was exhilarating, intoxicating even. Continuing to follow him from store to store, and observing his every move, she knew one thing for certain: she wanted to be with him. Mei wasn't accustomed to being out of her lab, let alone in a crowded mall. But here she was, trailing behind Izuku and his friends from a short distance, doing her best to stay inconspicuous. The bustling crowd provided ample cover as she weaved through the plaza, her eyes never leaving him. Her heart fluttered every time she caught a glimpse of his smile, the way he interacted with his friends, and the genuine kindness that seemed to radiate from him. She imagined herself by his side, talking to him, sharing her thoughts, her inventions, and maybe even her feelings. The idea was fascinating to her. Izuku wasn't just another student or a guinea pig for her gadgets. He was quickly becoming her greatest enigma, one she was determined to solve. But as Mei allowed herself to daydream, imagining what it would be like to be closer to him, she suddenly heard a voice call out to her. "Hey, isn't that Hatsume?" She froze, her heart skipping a beat as she realized she'd been spotted. It was Denki Kaminari, pointing directly at her. Before she could react, Denki had already gotten Izuku's attention. Izuku turned to look where Denki was pointing. Hatsume. Panic surged through Mei as she quickly ducked behind a nearby shop cart, her mind racing. She wasn't ready for this. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt genuinely nervous. Why had she been so careless? And why did the idea of facing him now make her feel so self-conscious? She peeked out from behind the cart, hoping to find an escape route, but it was too late. Izuku was already walking toward her, a curious yet friendly expression on his face. When he finally reached her, he bent down slightly to meet her eye level. "Hey, Hatsume," he greeted her with that same warm smile that always seemed to put everyone at ease. "What are you doing here?" Mei's mind went blank. For a moment, all she could focus on was his smile, his genuine interest in her presence, and the way he looked at her as if he was truly happy to see her. She wasn't used to this, wasn't used to feeling so flustered, and it was throwing her off balance. Mei stammered, feeling her cheeks heat up. Words, usually her strong suit when it came to tech talk, seemed to fail her. "I was just, looking for parts." "Yeah, parts." She realized how unconvincing she sounded, and her nerves only worsened. To make matters worse, she became hyper-aware of her choice of clothing, a casual, somewhat haphazard ensemble she'd thrown together in a hurry. She rarely gave much thought to her appearance, but now she wished she'd put in a bit more effort. Izuku, however, didn't seem to notice her anxiety. Instead, his smile grew even warmer, and to her surprise, he complimented her. "You look really nice today, Hatsume. I like your style, it's fresh." Mei's heart skipped another beat, and she felt her face flush even more. Compliments weren't something she received often, especially not about her appearance. She wasn't sure how to respond, and before she knew it, she was stumbling over her words again, a first for her. Thank you, she managed to say, her voice unusually soft. She glanced down, unable to meet his gaze for a moment. I don't usually go out much, so this is kinda new for me. As she spoke, Mei noticed out of the corner of her eye that Denki, along with the other guys, had started to move away, clearly giving them some space. They exchanged knowing looks, as if they could sense the awkward tension in the air and decided to leave them alone. Izuku, oblivious to their antics, looked back at her with understanding. I get that, it can be overwhelming sometimes, but it's nice to take a break and go somewhere different, right? Do you want some company? I can show you around if you'd like. The offer made Mei's heart swell with affection. She couldn't believe how kind he was, how easy it was for him to make her feel comfortable even when she was so out of her element. The thought of spending more time with him, just the two of them, was incredibly appealing, and she quickly nodded. Yeah, I'd like that, she replied, feeling a genuine smile tug at her lips. The nervousness she'd felt earlier began to fade, replaced by an eagerness to be near him, to finally have the opportunity she'd been longing for. As they walked together through the mall, Mei found herself more smitten with him than ever. Izuku's kindness, his easygoing nature, and the way he seemed genuinely interested in her made her heart race in a way that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. She still didn't fully understand these new emotions, but one thing was certain. Being with him felt right, and she was determined to explore whatever this feeling was. For the first time, Mei wasn't just thinking about her inventions or her next big project. She was thinking about him, about the possibility of something more between them. And as they continued to walk side by side, chatting about everything and nothing, Mei knew she was ready to take that step into the unknown, no matter how uncharted the territory might be. As Mei and Izuku wandered through the plaza together, the day felt like an unexpected adventure. For Mei, this was an entirely new experience, one that had nothing to do with her beloved babies or her workshop. She wasn't used to this kind of fun, but she found herself loving every second of it. They talked about everything, from her latest inventions to ideas on how to upgrade some of her tech. Izuku, with his deep understanding of quirks and battle strategies, offered insightful suggestions that sparked new ideas in Mei's mind. She eagerly jotted down notes on a small notepad she always carried, feeling a rush of excitement at the thought of getting back to her lab to try out these new concepts. But it wasn't all shop talk. As they continued to walk, they also indulged in some lighthearted window shopping, occasionally stopping to admire random items that caught their attention, whether it was a quirky gadget or a piece of clothing that Mei jokingly suggested would suit Izuku. It felt easy and comfortable, like they had known each other for much longer than they actually had. Eventually, they found themselves at the food court, where they decided to grab some lunch. Seated across from each other, the atmosphere between them was warm and relaxed. Mei, normally so focused on her work, was surprised at how much she was enjoying just sitting here, talking and laughing with Izuku. As they ate, Mei couldn't help but think about how different this was from her usual routine. It felt almost like a date, though she was too shy to admit that thought to herself, let alone say it out loud. But she couldn't deny the happiness bubbling up inside her. She wasn't sure when it had started. Maybe it was when Izuku had complimented her at the mall, or maybe when he had offered to accompany her, but now, the feeling was undeniable. She looked at him across the table, her heart warming as she saw the smile on his face. She realized she wanted to see that smile more often, to be the one who made him smile like that. I've had a great time today, she admitted, her voice softening as she spoke. Izuku looked up from his food, his eyes brightening at her words. I'm really glad to hear that, Hatsume. I've had a great time too. He hesitated for a moment, then continued with a more thoughtful tone. To be honest, I've always wondered what you liked doing outside of the shop. You're always so focused on your work, and I'm glad I got to know you better today. Mei felt her cheeks flush with warmth, a genuine smile spreading across her face. I'm happy I got to know you better too, Midoriya, she replied. Her usual bravado was absent, replaced by a quiet sincerity that surprised even herself. They both sat quietly, enjoying the comfortable silence between them. Mei found herself sneaking glances at him, her heart fluttering in a way that she still didn't fully understand but was starting to welcome. Then, Izuku broke the silence, his voice slightly tentative. "Hatsume, would you like to do this again sometime?" Surprised, Mei looked up at him, and her heart skipped a beat when she saw the bashful smile on his face. He was so earnest, so genuine, and she could see that he was just as nervous as she was. The implication of his question caused her heart to swell, and she realized that she wanted nothing more than to spend more time with him, to see where this strange and wonderful new feeling could lead. She smiled back at him, her heart pounding with excitement. "Yeah, I'd really like that." Her response seemed to make Izuku's smile grow even wider, and the two of them exchanged a look that was full of possibilities. As they continued their lunch, the world outside the bustling mall seemed to fade away. All that mattered was the connection they were building, one that felt as natural as it was surprising. Mei was starting to understand what was happening, but for once, she was okay with that. She didn't need to figure everything out right now. All she knew was that she was happy, and that was enough. Mei and Izuku were both enjoying the easygoing atmosphere that had settled between them as they shared lunch, the lines between friendship and something more starting to blur in the best possible way. Mei couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so relaxed, so genuinely happy just to be in someone's company. But even in this comfortable moment, there was a question gnawing at her, a tiny worry that she couldn't shake. She glanced at Izuku, who was currently focusing on finishing the last bite of his meal, and decided to take a risk. The question slipped out before she could stop herself. "So, Midoriya, about that girl from the training grounds, Ochako, right?" Izuku looked up, surprised by the sudden shift in the conversation. "Yeah, Ochako, what about her?" Mei hesitated, inwardly scolding herself for bringing it up, especially when everything had been going so well. But a part of her needed to know, had to know, even if the answer wasn't what she wanted to hear. "You two seem close. I was just wondering if there's something between you two." Izuku blinked, clearly not expecting that question. "Oh, no, it's nothing like that. Ochako is a really good friend, but that's all," he quickly assured her, his expression earnest yet the faint hint of a troubled look lingered on him. Hearing his response, Mei felt a mix of relief and embarrassment. Relief because it seemed like she didn't have to worry about competition for his attention. But embarrassment because she feared she might have just ruined what had been a perfect moment. She opened her mouth to say something, to clarify that she didn't mean to pry, but before she could get the words out, the ground beneath them suddenly shook violently. A massive explosion erupted from the west side of the plaza, sending shockwaves through the area. Smoke and debris filled the air, and the sound of terrified screams echoed through the once bustling mall. The atmosphere of their pseudo-date shattered in an instant, replaced by chaos and fear. Izuku was on his feet in a heartbeat, his expression shifting from surprised to determined in an instant. "Hatsume, stay here and get to safety," he ordered, his voice filled with urgency. Her heart pounded as she watched him prepare to run toward the danger. "But Midoriya," she started to protest, feeling an instinctive need to do something, anything to help him. Izuku turned to her, his eyes filled with resolve. "I'll be fine, but you need to find a pro-hero or a police officer and let them know what's happening. Please, just be safe, okay?" He didn't wait for a response. With a burst of energy, Izuku activated his quirk, and in a flash, he launched himself toward the source of the explosion, disappearing into the smoke and chaos. Mei stood frozen for a moment, the world around her spinning as the reality of the situation set in. The sound of distant cries and the sight of panicked civilians fleeing in every direction shook her out of her stupor. Her heart was racing, a whirlwind of emotions surging within her, fear for Izuku's safety, a deep worry that something terrible could happen to him, and an overwhelming helplessness that she wasn't used to feeling. She had always been confident, always in control when it came to her inventions, but this was different. This was a battle, and she wasn't equipped for it. But Izuku, he was made for this. She had seen him train, knew how strong and capable he was. Yet, that knowledge didn't ease the gnawing worry that settled in her chest. Clenching her fists, Mei's mind raced with conflicting thoughts. She wanted to chase after him, to be there for him, but she knew she'd only be in the way. He needed her to do what he asked, find help. But every fiber of her being screamed to stay with him, to make sure he was okay. The smoke continued to billow, and the sounds of destruction grew louder. Mei made her decision. She would do what he asked and find help, but not before making sure he knew she was there for him. She turned on her heel, running in the opposite direction to find the nearest pro-hero or law enforcement officer, her mind filled with nothing but worry for Izuku. Mei had never been one to deal with danger firsthand. She'd spent her life in the safety of her lab, buried in blueprints and prototypes, focused on crafting the next breakthrough in support technology. Explosions and chaos were supposed to be controlled in her world, the result of miscalculations on her part, not the product of a real-life villain attack. But today, in the middle of the chaos, everything felt raw and terrifying. As she ran alongside panicked civilians fleeing the mall, she could hear the echoes of battle growing louder behind her, the sound of explosions, metal crashing, and quirks clashing. The air was thick with fear, and Mei's heart pounded with every step she took. Despite the panic, Mei's mind was racing with thoughts of Izuku. She could still see the determined look on his face as he had rushed into the danger zone. He had told her to stay safe, to find help, but now, all she could think about was getting back to him. She couldn't shake the image of him getting hurt or worse. The very thought of it made her chest tighten with worry. As she pushed through the crowd, Mei saw an elderly man stumble and fall to the ground, too weak to get back up. Without hesitation, she rushed to his side and knelt down to help him. "I've got you," she reassured him, pulling him up onto his feet. Before she could fully steady the man, a security guard appeared, quickly taking over. "Thanks for helping," the guard said breathlessly. "You should get out of here. Pro-heroes are already on their way." Mei nodded, though her mind was already back on Izuku. The mention of heroes arriving should have comforted her, but instead, it only made her more anxious. "Some UA students are already in the thick of it," she informed the guard. "They're fighting the villain right now." The guard's eyes widened. "Then we need to move fast." But before he could finish, Mei was already backing away, her thoughts elsewhere. Technically, she had done her part. She had found help. Backup was on the way. But that wasn't enough for her. Izuku was still out there, fighting alone. Mei turned on her heel, her feet moving before her mind could catch up. She started running back toward the mall, ignoring the guard's shouts for her to come back. The adrenaline pumped through her veins, and with every step closer to the battle, her worry for Izuku grew stronger. She couldn't leave him behind, not when he might need her. She was no fighter, and she knew she probably wouldn't be able to do much in the heat of combat, but she wasn't going to stand by and let him get hurt. The thought of something happening to him, to the one person who made her heart race in ways she didn't fully understand, was unbearable. "I have to do something," she thought desperately, her mind laser-focused on finding him. "Even if it's just supporting him. I can help." As she got closer, the sounds of destruction and battle grew louder, making her heart race even more. The once bustling plaza had been reduced to rubble in places, the villain wreaking havoc as smoke billowed into the air. She could hear civilians still screaming in the distance, and the sound of explosions echoed all around her. But despite all that, one thing remained constant in her mind: Izuku. Her chest tightened again, this time with a surge of determination. She had to find him. She had to make sure he was okay. Whether it was a sudden burst of courage or her stubborn nature kicking in, Mei wasn't sure, but she knew one thing: she couldn't stay away, not now. Not when Izuku was in danger. Ignoring the fear that gnawed at her insides, she pressed on, sprinting back toward the heart of the fight, determined to reach him. Even if she couldn't fight, even if she couldn't defend herself, she had to be there. She wouldn't let him face this alone. Once reaching the west wing of the mall, Mei stood frozen for a moment, taking in the scene of utter destruction. The once bustling shopping plaza had turned into a war zone, littered with broken tiles, shattered glass, and twisted metal. The air was thick with dust and smoke, and the sounds of battle echoed relentlessly through the debris-strewn corridors. A pack of low-level Nomu swarmed the area, their grotesque, unnatural forms tearing through anything and anyone in their path. Their sheer size and strength were overwhelming, and they seemed to attack indiscriminately, without thought or purpose beyond destruction. But worse than the mindless beasts were the villains standing behind them, guiding their onslaught. Spinner, the reptilian-looking villain, and Mr. Compress, known for his dangerous ability to trap people and objects within his marbles, coordinated the chaos. Mei recognized them immediately from the news and the Hero Commission's most wanted lists. They were members of the League of Villains, a notorious group responsible for countless attacks across Japan. Her breath caught in her throat as she watched the battle unfold. Izuku, alongside Kaminari, Tokiyami, and Shiro, were giving it their all, fighting off the Nomus with everything they had. Izuku was a blur of green energy, his quirk enhancing his speed and strength as he kicked one of the monsters away, the shockwave from his blow sending debris flying in every direction. She barely managed to duck out of the way as a chunk of shattered wall came hurtling toward her, rolling to the side just in time. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she wasn't about to turn back now. She couldn't, not when Izuku was in the middle of this chaos. Shiro swung through the air, using his tape to latch onto a nearby beam, launching himself toward Spinner with precision. Spinner sneered as he swung his sword to deflect the attack, the clash sending sparks flying. Meanwhile, Denki was charging up, aiming his electricity at Mr. Compress. The masked villain merely chuckled in response, twirling one of his marbles between his fingers with casual ease. "Let's give these children a real show, shall we?" Mr. Compress said with a theatrical flourish. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed several marbles into the air, and in an instant, they expanded, releasing more Nomu, this time, a pack of winged beasts that screeched through the air. The newly summoned Nomus took to the skies, diving toward the UA students with terrifying speed. Mei's heart raced even faster. The situation was spiraling out of control, and the villains were gaining the upper hand. Her mind, usually so sharp and focused on her inventions, raced to find a solution. She wasn't a fighter, she knew that. But she was an inventor, and if there was one thing she could always rely on, it was her ability to create something useful out of almost anything. She activated her quirk, Zoom, her eyes scanning the chaotic battlefield for anything she could use. She quickly spotted a discarded maintenance cart a few meters away. It was full of tools, scrap metal, and wiring, things that could be repurposed into something useful. Nearby, there was also a broken-down security drone that had been destroyed in the initial attack. Its parts were still intact, though. "I can work with this," Mei muttered to herself, her confidence returning as her mind began piecing together a plan. With quick, nimble hands, Mei sprinted over to the maintenance cart, ducking behind a pile of debris to avoid the ongoing battle. She grabbed the necessary tools and parts, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. Within moments, she was fashioning a makeshift support item out of the available materials, a mini cannon that could fire electrified projectiles. It was crude, but it would work. She also quickly modified the drone, rewiring its circuitry to give it limited functionality again. With a few tweaks, she turned it into a small flying decoy that could draw the attention of the flying Nomu away from the heroes. "This will do for now." Holding her newly crafted cannon, Mei peeked around the corner and spotted Izuku mid-battle. His movements were precise, every kick and punch filled with determination. But she could see the exhaustion setting in. He couldn't keep this up forever, especially with more Nomu on the way. She took a deep breath and steadied herself. "I can't let him face this alone." Without thinking, Mei darted out from behind her cover and aimed her cannon at one of the airborne Nomu that was diving toward Izuku. She fired, the electrified projectile striking the Nomu directly in the chest. The beast screeched in pain, its wings flailing as it veered off course and crashed into the ground. "Midoriya," Mei called out as she activated the drone, sending it into the air. The drone buzzed loudly, catching the attention of the other winged Nomus. They screeched and followed the decoy as it zoomed away, giving Izuku and the others a brief reprieve. Izuku looked over at her, his eyes widening in surprise. "Hatsume, what are you doing here?" Mei gave him a determined grin, holding up her cannon. "Helping you. Duh. Now quit wasting time and get back to fighting. I've got your back." For a moment, Izuku looked like he wanted to argue, but he quickly realized there was no time. With a grateful nod, he turned back to the fight, launching himself toward Spinner with renewed determination. Mei, meanwhile, kept her focus on the flying Nomus, using her cannon to take out any that got too close. Her heart raced, but not just from the battle. Seeing Izuku fight, knowing she was helping him in her own way, it filled her with a sense of purpose she had never felt before. "I'll protect him," she thought, her hands steady as she reloaded her cannon. "I'll protect him, no matter what." The battle raged on, with Izuku and his friends struggling to keep the Nomus at bay. Even with their combined efforts, the winged Nomus proved especially difficult to handle. They soared above the battlefield, dive-bombing with terrifying speed, their monstrous screeches filling the air. Izuku's fists and kicks connected with some, but they kept coming, relentless in their attack. Tokiyami fought valiantly by his friend's side, using Dark Shadow to hold off the ground-bound Nomus. However, the intense sunlight pouring through the shattered ceiling weakened Dark Shadow, making it difficult for Tokiyami to control the powerful entity. Dark Shadow, usually so fierce, was forced to stay closer to Tokiyami, its usual ferocity muted by the harsh light. "I'm doing what I can, but Dark Shadow can't handle them in this sunlight," Tokiyami shouted, frustration evident in his voice as he tried to shield himself from a swooping Nomu. Spinner, meanwhile, had managed to gain the upper hand against Zero, tossing him back with a powerful swing of his large blade. Zero landed roughly against a collapsed pillar, groaning as he struggled to get back to his feet. The situation was spiraling out of control, and the villains had the upper hand. Mei's heart pounded in her chest as she took in the scene. Izuku was still fighting with everything he had, but even he couldn't be everywhere at once. The winged Nomus were too fast, and with Tokiyami hindered by the sunlight, it felt like the villains had the advantage. "Think, Hatsume, think," she mentally scolded herself. She wasn't a combat specialist, but she was an inventor, and she knew how to make the most of any situation. And right now, they needed a game changer. That's when it hit her: electricity. She glanced over at Denki, who had been throwing bolts of lightning at Mr. Compress, but had yet to deal a decisive blow. "If I can use his quirk, I might be able to turn the tide." "Sparky boy," she shouted over the chaos, catching his attention. He looked at her, slightly confused. "What's up, Hatsume? Now's not really the time for tinkering," he yelled back, dodging a Nomu that flew overhead. Mei grinned, her mind already working through the calculations. "Exactly, but I need your electricity. Come over here, quick." Denki hesitated for a moment, but something in Mei's determined expression convinced him. He sprinted over to her, sliding behind cover as a Nomu flew by overhead. "What's the plan?" he asked, breathless. Mei grabbed his wrist and held up her modified stun cannon, the one she had just used to take down a single winged Nomu. "I can amplify this thing if I hook it up to your quirk. We'll hit all the Nomus at once, but I need you to give it everything you've got." Denki's eyes widened as he looked at the cannon. "You think it'll work?" Mei's grin widened. "I know it'll work. Trust me, I've run the numbers. Just zap this thing with as much electricity as you can, and I'll handle the rest." Denki nodded, trusting her judgment. "All right, let's do this." He placed his hand on the cannon's power source, and Mei quickly rewired a few connections, making sure the cannon could handle the extra voltage. She positioned the cannon, taking aim at the center of the battlefield where most of the Nomus were gathered. "Get ready," she shouted. Denki gritted his teeth and activated his quirk, sending a surge of electricity into the cannon. The device hummed loudly, sparks crackling from the overloaded circuits as it absorbed the electrical energy. Mei's hands moved swiftly, adjusting the controls to handle the immense power Denki was pouring in. As the cannon reached maximum charge, Mei took a deep breath. Firing. She pulled the trigger, and a massive shockwave of electricity erupted from the cannon, surging through the air in a blinding arc. The wave of energy expanded outward, catching every single Nomu in its path. The winged Nomus screeched in agony as the electrical current surged through them, their wings spasming uncontrollably. The ground-based Nomus fared no better, their massive bodies freezing in place as the electricity coursed through their muscles, immobilizing them completely. The entire battlefield seemed to come to a halt as the electrical shockwave swept through, hitting every Nomu present. Even the villains, Spinner and Mr. Compress were momentarily stunned by the sheer power of the attack. When the shockwave dissipated, the area fell eerily silent. All the Nomus had collapsed, their bodies twitching and smoking from the overload of electricity. The once terrifying monsters now lay still, completely incapacitated. Izuku, who had been fighting off 2 Nomus at once, looked around in astonishment. He turned toward Mei and Denki, realization dawning on him as he saw the modified cannon in Mei's hands. "Hatsume, you did this?" he asked, breathless. Mei stood up, a confident grin on her face. "Told you I've got your back." She gave him a thumbs up before turning to Denki, who looked exhausted but satisfied. "Great job, Sparky. We just fried an entire army of ugly monsters." Denki, quite dazed from the effort, managed a weak smile. "Yeah, I think I might have overdone it a bit." Izuku rushed over to them, a look of pure relief on his face. "That was incredible, both of you. You really turned things around." Mei's heart fluttered at his praise, but she quickly pushed the feeling aside. Now wasn't the time for that. She focused on the battlefield, where the villains were starting to recover from the shock. Spinner was already on his feet, glaring at the students with renewed anger. "This isn't over yet," Spinner growled, tightening his grip on his sword. Mr. Compress smirked, still twirling one of his marbles in his hand. "Indeed, we'll have to retreat for now, but don't think this is the end, heroes." Mei tightened her grip on the cannon, ready for whatever came next. But for now, they had the upper hand, and that was all that mattered. "I'll keep you safe, Midoriya," she thought, her determination stronger than ever. "No matter what it takes." As Mei stood in the aftermath of the battle, her heart still racing from the thrill of their victory, she suddenly felt a pair of hands grab her from behind. Panic surged through her as cold steel pressed against her throat. Her eyes widened in shock, and she instinctively stiffened. She barely managed to glance over her shoulder, only to see a seemingly random old woman behind her, holding a knife to her neck. The lady's face was eerily calm as she spoke. "I've been watching you," the woman whispered softly, her voice disturbingly sweet. Watching Izuku all day at the mall. You like him, don't you?" Mei's breath caught in her throat. She didn't recognize the girl, but something about her presence sent a chill down her spine. Her confusion deepened as she tried to understand what was happening. Then, the woman's face began to melt, shifting like clay. Mei gasped in horror as the familiar, unhinged grin of Himiko Toga, the League's resident serial killer, emerged, her golden eyes gleaming with malice. Toga's smirk widened as she tightened her grip on the knife, pressing it closer to Mei's skin. "You see, I've had my eyes on Izuku for a long time. But to see him suddenly so close to you, someone I don't even know, it's quite upsetting. Very unfair. He's my significant other after all." Mei's heart pounded in her chest. Her mind raced, frantically trying to figure out what to do. She had never been in a situation like this before. The danger was real, and Toga's aura screamed violence. But something inside Mei, the same fire that drove her relentless passion for inventing, flared up. With quaking hands and a tremor in her voice, she spoke. You'll never have him," she said, surprising even herself with the boldness of her words. Toga blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "Oh, and why's that?" Mei's throat tightened, but she forced herself to continue, her voice shaky but growing stronger with each word. Because he's mine." In that moment, Mei finally admitted it, to Toga, to herself, and to the world. She wasn't just fascinated by Izuku anymore. She didn't just admire him. She wanted him, in a way she had never wanted anything before. It finally hit her, finally revealed itself to her. She had a crush on him. Toga's unsettling grin only widened at Mei's declaration of love. Her grip on the knife tightened as sharp edge burned against Mei's skin. Her yellow eyes sparkled with a twisted kind of joy, as if Mei's bold statement excited her. "How inspiring!" she cooed, her voice dripping with amusement. "You love him too, isn't that just adorable?" Mei's heart pounded in her chest, her nerves on edge. The knife at her throat felt even sharper, and Toga's erratic excitement only made the situation more terrifying. Mei was a genius when it came to inventions and innovations, but this was completely out of her element. Toga leaned in closer, whispering in her ear, "Maybe I should you dry, Then I could turn into you, and finally get Izuku to notice me. Don't you think that would be fun?" Mei's stomach twisted at the thought, her body tensing. She tried to move, but the cold blade pressed hard against her skin kept her frozen in place. A small burning cut had been formed and it irked her like a paper cut. Fear coursed through her veins, but she refused to back down. She couldn't let Toga win. As if on cue, Izuku turned around, finally noticing what was happening behind him. "Hatsume!" he screamed, panic and fury filled his voice. Toga giggled at his reaction, her gaze flicking to him with an almost teasing look. "Oh, Izuku, I knew you'd notice eventually. I'll be back for you, don't worry." Before Mei could process what was happening, Mr. Compress, landing a few yards away from the two girls, sighed in irritation. "Toga, dear, stop playing with your food. We need to leave, now." Behind them, dark, swirling portals began forming, a clear sign that their retreat was imminent. Toga pouted, clearly wanting to prolong her fun. But she knew better than to keep her comrades waiting and to defy Shigaraki's orders. All right, geez," Toga muttered, but before letting go of Mei, she glanced at Izuku one last time with a mischievous grin. "Don't forget me, Izuku. I'll be waiting." With one swift motion, the villainess moved the knife away from Mei's throat. The teenage genius barely had time to let out a breath of relief when she felt a sharp pain in her side. Toga had stabbed her after all, a quick and parting gift. Mei gasped, her legs wobbling as the pain hit her hard. Her hand instinctively went to her wound, trying to stop the bleeding that was already staining her shirt. Toga, her twisted smile still plastered on her face, vanished into the portal with the rest of the league. Izuku's scream echoed in the air as he rushed toward her. "Hatsume!" The world around her began to blur rapidly as the pain intensified, and she fell to her knees, her vision darkening fast. His horrified expression was the last image burned into her memories as she blacked out. Mei slowly blinked her eyes open, her vision blurry as she regained consciousness. The sterile scent of the hospital filled her nose, and the quiet beeping of machines surrounded her. Her body felt stiff, her limbs heavy, and a sharp, numbing pain radiated from her right side, preventing her from moving at all. She tried to sit up, but her muscles refused to cooperate. Instead, she let her head loll to the side, taking in her surroundings. She was alone in a small, dimly lit hospital room. An IV drip was hooked into her arm, feeding fluids into her system. A breathing apparatus sat snugly over her mouth and nose, and a heart monitor beeped rhythmically in the background. On the wall in front of her, a small TV was playing a random movie, though Mei didn't recognize it. She stared at it blankly for a few seconds, her mind still groggy. But as the fog in her brain started to clear, her memories came rushing back all at once. The mall, the fight, Izuku. Her heart skipped a beat as she recalled spending the day with him. They had been together, talking, laughing, getting closer. It felt so natural, like the two of them fit perfectly. But then everything had gone wrong. The Nomus had attacked, the League of Villains showed up, and chaos ensued. And then, Toga. Mei's stomach tightened as she remembered Toga's chilling voice, the knife at her throat, the crazed look in her eyes. She had threatened to take Mei's place, to drink her blood, to steal her identity. Mei shuddered, her hand reflexively moving toward her side where the stabbing pain throbbed the most. She had almost died. The realization hit her hard, causing her breath to hitch. Toga had left her for dead, and if it hadn't been for Izuku, she might not have made it at all. Mei's eyes began to well up with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. She wasn't one to cry easily, and she hated feeling this vulnerable. But the weight of what had happened was overwhelming. Izuku, her mind repeated, her thoughts circling back to him. She wondered if he was okay, if he had managed to fend off the villains after Toga attacked her. She wished she could have been stronger, smarter, more useful in the moment. Instead, she had been forced the role of a helpless hostage. A damsel in distress. For a moment, all the energy drained from her, and she stared blankly at the ceiling, overwhelmed by both the physical pain and the emotional turmoil that gripped her heart. The steady beeping of the heart monitor suddenly quickened, reflecting the surge of emotions racing through Mei's fragile body. Her breathing became shallow as the weight of her near-death experience pressed down on her chest. Tears brimmed in her eyes, but instead of fear, something else rose inside her. She had lived. With trembling hands, she weakly removed the breathing apparatus from her mouth, gasping softly as the cold air hit her lungs. She had defied death, stared it in the face and survived. And for what? Why was she still here? The answer was crystal clear now, the hypothesis she had been working on for days, maybe even weeks, finally reaching its undeniable conclusion. She let out a short, breathless laugh, tears spilling down her cheeks as a smile slowly crept onto her lips. Her body ached, and her mind was still reeling, but amidst all the pain, one truth rang loud and clear. "I love him," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet room. She had spent so much time observing him, studying him, trying to figure out why her heart raced whenever she thought of him, why she couldn't stop thinking about him even in the middle of inventing. It had all led to this. Her feelings weren't just fascination, not just admiration. She loved him, Izuku Midoriya. She loved his determination, his kindness, his strength. And she had survived, pulled back from the brink of death, because there was still something she had to do. She refused to die before telling him. The thought filled her with an unexpected warmth, a new kind of strength. Mei's smile grew, and despite the tears on her face, there was a spark of resolve in her eyes. She had a goal now, something greater than any invention she had ever dreamed of. She needed to see him again, to tell him how she felt. And nothing, not even the League of Villains, would stop her from doing that. As Mei basked in the clarity of her newfound revelation, the door to her hospital room creaked open. She instinctively tensed, her body still fragile, and her mind not fully processing who might be entering. To her surprise, it was Ochako who stood in the doorway, her expression filled with shock and worry. Before Mei could react, Ochako rushed to her side, gently taking her hand, her face contorted with a mix of relief and pain. Mei blinked in confusion, not expecting Ochako to be here, let alone to act so concerned for her. "Ochak," Mei muttered weakly, surprised that she had even remembered her name. It wasn't too long ago that Mei had forced herself to memorize Ochako's name and face, driven by a jealous desire to know more about the girl who was often by Izuku's side. But now, why was she here? Ochako sat beside her, her voice shaky as she bombarded Mei with a stream of questions. "Are you okay? How are you feeling? Does it hurt? I was so worried when we heard what happened, and Izuku, he's beside himself, he was so scared for Yo." Mei blinked, still disoriented and confused. Ochako's concern felt so genuine, but it didn't make sense to her. She'd always assumed that Ochako didn't like her, that she saw Mei as little more than a nuisance around Izuku. Why are you here?" Mei finally asked, her voice soft but tinged with the confusion she felt inside. Ochako's words faltered, her stream of questions coming to an abrupt stop. Her face shifted, a hint of regret crossing her features as she fell silent for a moment. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter, more introspective. I know I haven't exactly been kind to you," Ochako admitted, her grip on Mei's hand loosening slightly. "Since the first time we met, I looked at you in a lesser way. I didn't take you seriously because I thought you were just a bad habit for Deku." Mei's heart tightened at Ochako's words, her chest aching in a way that had nothing to do with her injury. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed hurt more than she had expected. Still, she said nothing, allowing Ochako to continue. I thought you were just obsessed with your inventions and that you didn't really care about Deku the way others do," Ochako continued, her voice thick with guilt. "I saw you as a distraction. Someone who didn't understand what it meant to be close to him." Mei's lips pressed into a thin line, the sting of Ochako's confession lingering in the air between them. It hurt, but at the same time, Mei understood. She had always been so focused on her work, on her inventions, that she never considered how others saw her relationship with Izuku. To them, she was just the eccentric girl who obsessed over her, babies, and treated Izuku like another test subject. But now, after everything, she knew that her feelings were real, stronger than she had ever anticipated. She wasn't just obsessed with his potential or his abilities. She was in love with him. Ochako's face softened with regret. But I was wrong, she admitted, her voice almost a whisper now. Seeing how worried he was about you, how much he cared, it made me realize that I didn't give you enough credit. You matter to him, more than I thought. Mei remained silent, letting Ochako's words sink in. She didn't know what to say, but for once, it wasn't about inventions or competition. It was about something much deeper than that. Maybe, just maybe, Ochako had seen something in her that Mei had been afraid to admit until now. Ochako's eyes glistened with unshed tears as her voice wavered, recounting the events at the mall. You came back for him, Mei. You didn't have to, but you did. You ran straight into danger to protect him, to help him and the others. I was wrong about you this whole time. Her words trailed off, but the emotion behind them was undeniable. She sniffled, wiping at her eyes. You're a true hero, Mei. I'm sorry I misjudged you. Mei's heart swelled, not just from the acknowledgement, but from the pride of knowing she had done something genuinely brave. A warmth spread through her chest, chasing away the lingering pain and uncertainty. For the first time in a long while, someone had recognized her not for her inventions, but for who she truly was, and it felt incredible. With a toothy grin, Mei leaned back against the hospital bed, her usual confidence returning as she looked at Ochako. Well, in that case, you've earned yourself a lifetime discount on all my babies, she said with a mischievous glint in her eyes. Anything you need, any gear, I'll make sure it's top of the line for you. Ochako blinked in surprise, her tears pausing for a moment before a smile spread across her face. A chuckle escaped her lips, and soon, both girls were laughing, the tension that had hung between them all this time dissolving like mist in the sunlight. It was as if the weight of their past misunderstandings had lifted, leaving room for something new to grow. They laughed together, the sound filling the small hospital room, as though they had always been friends. The bond that had formed between them wasn't just built on mutual respect but on a shared understanding of what it meant to care for the same person, Izuku. Mei's laughter abruptly ceased, her body suddenly filled with a sense of urgency. Without thinking, she tried to swing her legs off the bed, pushing herself upright despite the searing pain in her side. The IV tugged at her arm, and her muscles protested, but Mei's mind was laser-focused on one thing: she had to find Izuku. Mei, stop, Ochako cried, her voice filled with concern as she quickly moved to hold Mei down. You're still hurt. You can't just get up like this. You have a stab wound, for heaven's sake. But Mei, frantic and determined, barely registered Ochako's words. I need to see him, she exclaimed, her voice desperate. I need to speak to him, now. Ochako tightened her grip, her brow furrowing in frustration as she wrestled with Mei, who was trying her best to wiggle free. Hatsume, you're not in any shape to be running around. You'll rip your stitches. Just calm down. They struggled for a moment, Ochako trying to prevent Mei from hurting herself, while Mei's stubbornness fueled her attempts to break free. The scene was chaotic until a familiar voice cut through the scuffle like a knife. Mei. Both girls froze instantly, turning their heads toward the door. Izuku stood there, panting slightly as if he had run all the way to the hospital. His face was flushed with worry, eyes wide with concern as he took in the scene before him, Mei in bed, trying to get up, and Ochako holding her down. Midoriya, Mei breathed, her chest tight with both relief and something deeper. The frantic energy that had pushed her moments ago seemed to dissipate at the mere sight of him. He quickly moved to her side, his eyes scanning her over as if to confirm for himself that she was okay. You're awake, he said, his voice soft but filled with emotion. I've been so worried about you, Mei. Hearing the concern in his voice caused a lump to form in Mei's throat. She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes again, but this time, they weren't from pain or fear, they were from the overwhelming relief and happiness of seeing him, safe and sound. I'm okay, Mei finally whispered, her voice cracking slightly. She wanted to say so much more, but the words got caught in her throat. Just seeing him standing there, looking at her with such care, made her heart swell to the point of bursting. Ochako let go of Mei's shoulders and took a step back, giving them space. Izuku's gaze softened as he reached out to gently take Mei's hand in his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I'm so glad you're okay," he said, his voice filled with quiet sincerity. Mei looked up at him, her heart racing, and for the first time in her life, words failed her. All she could do was hold on to his hand, silently vowing that once she could gather her thoughts, she'd tell him everything that had been building inside her since the day they met. Without a word, Mei sat up, ignoring the pain that flared in her side, and wrapped her arms tightly around Izuku. She buried her face in his chest, holding onto him as if she might lose him if she let go. For once, words weren't needed, just the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek and the warmth of his presence was enough. Izuku froze for a moment, surprised by the sudden embrace, but quickly melted into it. Gently, almost hesitantly, he placed his arms around her, careful not to hurt her still injured body. His touch was soft, protective, as if he understood how much this moment meant to her without needing to ask. They stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, neither of them speaking, simply finding comfort in each other's presence. Ochako, standing by the door, watched the scene unfold, her heart tightening with a mix of emotions. Seeing them like this, embracing so intimately, made her feel like she was intruding on something deeply personal, something that went beyond words or explanations. With a quiet sigh, Ochako stepped back, her expression softening. She knew this moment wasn't for her. It was theirs. Silently, she turned and slipped out of the room, leaving the two of them alone to share the comfort of each other's arms. As the door clicked shut behind Ochako, the room seemed to grow even quieter. Mei tightened her hold on Izuku, her body finally relaxing as she let out a shaky breath. She didn't know when she'd be able to tell him everything, but for now, this was enough, just having him there, feeling safe in his arms. Mei clung to Izuku, feeling the warmth of his body against hers, the steady rhythm of his breath calming her racing thoughts. In his arms, she felt safe, connected, an overwhelming sensation blossomed in her chest, something she had no word for other than love. The moment stretched on, and with each second, the feeling grew stronger, filling her with a warmth she'd never known before. Izuku, ever gentle, didn't try to pull away. Instead, he spoke softly, his words filled with concern and care. "I was so worried, Mei. You really scared me. I'm just glad you're okay." His voice was soothing, grounding, and Mei couldn't help but smile even wider, her heart swelling with every word. Tears of happiness brimmed in her eyes, flowing freely as she buried her face deeper into his chest, letting his comforting words wash over her. He cared about her, more than she had ever realized, and that knowledge only made her heart race faster. She didn't want to let go. She wanted to stay like this, forever if she could. Overcome by the flood of emotions, Mei acted without thinking. She leaned in and pressed a soft kiss against his neck. It was instinctual, a pure expression of the joy and affection surging through her. Izuku immediately recoiled at the unexpected touch, his entire body stiffening in surprise. His face flushed a deep shade of red, his eyes wide in shock. "Ha Hatsume," he stammered, utterly flustered, his usual composure shattered. But Mei, overwhelmed with emotion, only smiled wider through her tears. She was simply overjoyed, too happy, too filled with love to hold back. The kiss wasn't calculated or planned, it was her heart spilling over, unable to contain itself any longer. Looking up at him, her eyes bright with happiness and affection, she whispered, "I love you, Midoriya." Izuku's breath caught in his throat, his mind racing as he stared down at Mei, speechless. The weight of her words hung in the air between them, full of meaning and truth. He didn't know what to say, but the sincerity in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. Mei, through her soft tears and trembling breaths, knew she must have looked a mess, her eyes puffy from crying, her cheeks flushed, and her hair in disarray. But none of it mattered to her. Her sobs were not of pain or fear, they were of love, of gratitude. She had finally understood her heart, and it was so clear now. It belonged to Izuku, completely. Izuku stood there, his eyes wide and his face flushed with embarrassment and surprise. He didn't know what to say, the weight of her confession hanging heavily between them. His hand instinctively touched the spot on his neck where her lips had left a soft, lingering mark. He stared down at her, speechless, trying to process the overwhelming emotions swirling inside him. Mei smiled through her tears, her heart swelling with more love than she had ever thought possible. She reached out, grabbing both of his hands with her own, holding them tightly, as if afraid to let go. The warmth of his hands in hers felt like an anchor in this moment of emotional intensity. She waited for him, patiently, lovingly, her heart pounding in her chest as she searched his eyes for a response. Her confession hung in the air, full of raw emotion, as she silently willed him to understand just how much he meant to her. The silence between them grew heavy, monumental, stretching just a little too long for Mei's comfort. Her heart began to race faster, the vulnerability of the moment weighing on her. But then, finally, Izuku moved. He raised his hand, gently wiping away the tear stain on her left cheek. His touch was soft, tender, and Mei instinctively leaned into it, a loving smile spreading across her face. Izuku smiled back at her, seeing a side of her he hadn't fully understood before, a side that was vulnerable, open, and full of feelings she'd kept hidden for so long. The air between them felt charged with an unspoken understanding. Mei, unable to contain herself any longer, whispered again, her voice trembling but sincere, "I love you, Izuku. I really do, since the sports festival, since everything." Her words tumbled out, raw and unfiltered. "I didn't understand it at first. It was all strange and confusing. I wasn't used to these feelings, so I followed you, studied you, analyzed you, trying to find the answers." She gave a little laugh, looking down. "I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. I needed to know why you made me feel like this." Izuku listened intently, his eyes soft and full of empathy. He didn't interrupt her, letting her speak as she poured out everything she had been holding back. Mei's heart raced as she continued, the weight of her words leaving her chest lighter with every confession. "And today, even though I was stabbed," she hesitated for a moment, "I'm almost glad it happened because without it, I might not have realized all of this. This moment might not have happened." Izuku's expression tightened at her words, the thought of her being hurt because of him choking him up. His emotions welled up, and before he could stop himself, he leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers. Both of them closed their eyes, lost in the intimate connection between them. They stayed like that, breathing in sync, their foreheads touching as if the rest of the world had disappeared, leaving only the two of them in this fragile, precious moment. Izuku spoke, his voice soft and laced with guilt. "I'm sorry, Mei, for being so oblivious to how you felt. I was so caught up in training, in becoming a hero, that I didn't realize what was right in front of me. And, for not seeing how beautiful you are, behind all the grease, the grime, and everything. You're incredible." That last part resonated deeply within Mei. Her heart swelled at his words, at being called beautiful by the one person who mattered most to her. It was a word she rarely associated with herself, always covered in oil and tangled in her inventions. But hearing it from him, in this tender moment, made it feel real. Izuku's voice grew more pained as he continued, his forehead still resting against hers. "But, I'm so sorry I wasn't fast enough to stop Toga. Watching you bleed in my arms, it was the most horrifying thing I've ever experienced. I thought I was going to lose you. I guess I would have felt the same if it was anyone else, but with you. I could feel my heart screaming. I felt so useless." He weakly scoffed, his self-deprecating thoughts spilling out. But before he could spiral any further, Mei lifted her hand to his cheek, her thumb brushing over his skin as she softly rebuked him. "Don't you dare say that, Izuku," she said, her voice firm but full of affection. "You saved my life. You got me here in time. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here at all." Her fingers curled slightly against his cheek. "You are my hero, forever. And much more, if you're okay with what I feel for you." Her words hung in the air, filled with honesty and vulnerability. She wasn't just asking for his forgiveness, she was asking for his heart. For him to understand that what she felt wasn't just admiration or gratitude, but something deeper. Something lasting. Izuku looked at her, truly looked at her, and for a moment, he saw beyond the grease, beyond the eccentricities, beyond the quirks that made her who she was. He saw the person who had braved danger for him, who had been by his side in her own unique way. And in that moment, he understood. He gently pressed his forehead a little closer to hers, his voice as soft as a feather. "I'm okay with it, Mei. I really am." Mei's heart fluttered at Izuku's words, even if it wasn't the outright confession she had longed for. It wasn't a declaration of love, but it was something just as meaningful: acceptance. Izuku knew now, and he wasn't running from it. The weight she had been carrying for so long suddenly felt lighter. Still, she couldn't help but feel a desire growing inside her, a deep yearning to kiss him. She had never kissed anyone before and had no clue how to even start, but the idea of it felt right, natural. Yet, just as the thought began to form, Izuku's soft voice interrupted her. "Mei, can you give me a few days, please?" he asked, his tone almost pleading. "I need some time to think. I promise, by the end of it, I'll have my answer. I'll be honest with you, no matter what." Mei went quiet, a pensive look crossing her face as she processed his request. A few days. He needed time to think it over. Of course he did, she realized. She should have expected that. Izuku was methodical, thoughtful, and careful. He wouldn't rush into something as important as this without making sure he knew how he truly felt. She gave a little sigh, not out of frustration, but out of understanding. Of course, he would want to analyze this, she mused internally. Like a problem to solve or a hypothesis to test. It wasn't exactly the romantic whirlwind she had imagined, but it was something that made sense to her in a way. He was going to think about it, seriously. He wasn't dismissing her feelings or running from them. And that was more than enough for now. She smiled, a small but genuine one, and nodded. "All right, Izuku, a few days." Her heart still buzzed with excitement, and even though she had to wait, she knew that this moment of understanding, was a step forward to what she now wished to be a part of. They spent the rest of their day together talking. Once visiting hours had ended, Mei was reluctant to let him leave, but he promised to visit again the next day and the day after and the day after. She would be discharged after a few days and then be allowed to attend classes once more. Watching television, she felt at peace with herself. Yeah, she got stabbed, and that would have been the end for her, but at least she was proud of the end result of this long personal endeavor. The sun began to descend, and she could not wait for tomorrow to already arrive. She closed her eyes and hummed a happy tune. Izuku, solely on her mind. The next few days dragged on for Mei. It felt strange, almost tortuous, not being in her lab tinkering with her babies, or working on new schematics. The slow pace of hospital life was edging her out, the quietness giving her too much time to think. About her injury, about the scar she now bore, and most of all, about Izuku. She was healing well, but the stitches on her side still ached when she moved too quickly. A nurse helped her walk around the halls to alleviate the pain, giving her some much-needed movement. Mei, never one to stay idle for too long, found herself restless. She hated being out of action, even if her mind kept drifting back to that moment with Izuku. The scar on her side was going to be a permanent reminder of the attack, a reminder of what she'd gone through. But to her, it was also a mark of something more. It was proof that she had survived, that she had been brave, and that she had stood by Izuku in the face of danger. She traced her fingers along the edge of the bandage, thinking about how it symbolized the shift in her life, the realization of her feelings, the confession, and the wait for Izuku's answer. The hospital was mostly quiet, her days measured by routine checkups and slow, careful walks. Despite the physical pain, it was the emotional waiting that gnawed at her the most. She wondered what Izuku was thinking and what conclusion he would come to after the time he had asked for. Mei was genuinely surprised when a few of her classmates from UA came by to visit her. As they filed into her hospital room, she blinked in confusion, not fully recognizing most of their faces. She greeted them with her usual energetic smile but couldn't help her comedic dismay as she realized she had little to no recollection of any of them. Only two names had truly stuck in her mind thus far, Ochako and Izuku. It made for some awkward, yet amusing moments. "Oh, you're from UA too, right? Sorry, I don't remember you," Mei admitted bluntly, scratching her head. Her visitors laughed it off, knowing Mei's singular focus on her inventions often left her a little disconnected from everything else. By the time Ochako arrived, she brought with her all of the girls from Class 1A. Momo, Jiro, Mina, Tsuyu, and Toru joined in, crowding around her bed. Mei had no clue why they had all come, but the attention was admittedly nice. She found herself sitting up more, chatting with them, and for once, being the center of conversation in a way that wasn't about her latest invention. The girls wanted to know more about her, asking questions about what she liked, what her hobbies were, and if she ever had time for fun outside of the lab. But inevitably, the conversation veered back into her creative mad scientist mindset. As she started explaining her newest idea in advanced detail, their curious expressions turned to bewilderment. Mina blinked and laughed nervously, trying to follow along. Wow, that sounds complicated. Momo nodded in agreement, though she understood some of what Mei was saying. Yes, quite intricate, but maybe you could explain it a little slower. Ochako chuckled, shaking her head. Yeah, Mei, you lost us back at Jet Booster. Mei paused mid-sentence, blinking at the group and realizing she'd rambled again. Oh, oops, she laughed it off with a big grin. Guess I got carried away. Despite her eccentricities, the girls stayed and chatted for a while, trying to get to know Mei better. For the first time, she found herself trying to connect with her classmates, even if her mind constantly drifted back to Izuku and the days she was counting down in her head. As the group continued chatting, Mina suddenly leaned in with a mischievous grin, eyes twinkling with excitement. So, Hatsume, I heard you confessed your crush to Midoriya. The others turned to Mina with wide eyes, clearly not aware of this development. Wait, what? Jiro exclaimed, looking between Mina and Mei. Since when? Mina grinned even wider, pointing at Ochako. Ochako told me. Ochako, blushing furiously, held up her hands defensively. I'm sorry. Deku confided in me, and it just slipped out, I swear. The room buzzed with sudden interest, and all eyes were on Mei, who, as usual, remained utterly unfazed. Without missing a beat, she shrugged and bluntly stated, yeah, I'm in love with him. Told him after waking up. The girls collectively gasped in excitement, their faces lighting up like they were living through a romance drama. Mina nearly jumped out of her chair, clapping her hands together. That's amazing. Oh my gosh, how did he take it? What did he say? Are you guys dating now? Momo leaned in curiously, her calm demeanor masking her clear interest. Yes, what happened after you confessed? Even Jiro, who usually kept her cool, was paying close attention. I can't believe I missed all of this. Mei, however, simply tilted her head. He said he needs some time to think about it. The girls' excited reactions intensified, with everyone offering opinions and suggestions. Oh, that's classic Midoriya, overthinking everything, Tsuyu said in her usual calm manner. Mina squealed. That's adorable, he's totally going to say yes, right? I mean, he has to. You guys are, like, a perfect match. Yeah, you're super confident, and he's always so nervous, opposites attract. Toru added with a playful tone. Momo, ever the voice of reason, offered her own advice. If you're truly serious about your feelings, then just be yourself. Don't feel like you need to rush anything. Give him the space to come to his own decision. Mei listened to them all, processing their words, though the concept of dating advice was still foreign to her. She appreciated their enthusiasm, even if she didn't fully grasp the finer details. She nodded, but her straightforward nature took over once more. I don't really care about all that. I love him, and that's it. If he says yes, great. If not, well, I'll still keep studying him. The girls couldn't help but laugh at Mei's blunt honesty, though they all found her genuine feelings endearing. Well, whatever happens, Mina said, grinning, you've got our support. You and Midoriya make a pretty awesome pair. As they continued to swoon and offer Mei more tips, everything from, just smile more, to, maybe don't scare him with tech talk, Ochako sat quietly, a small smile on her face. While she had her own feelings about Izuku, Seeing Mei so open and honest about her love for him made her feel at ease. As Mei was finally discharged from the hospital, Ochako wheeled her out herself, the two of them chatting casually as they moved through the hospital's hallways. Mei was in high spirits, eager to get back to her workshop and resume her work, though the prospect of seeing Izuku again also loomed in her mind, filling her with excitement she couldn't quite suppress. Nearing the hospital's entrance, Ochako broke the comfortable silence between them, her tone gentle but thoughtful. "Mei, there's something I've been meaning to tell you." Mei, her usual confident self, turned to Ochako with a curious tilt of her head. "What is it? You're not going to tell me to stop talking about my babies again, are you?" Ochako smiled softly, shaking her head. "No, nothing like that. It's about Izuku." Mei's interest was immediately piqued. Taking a deep breath, Ochako spoke quietly, her words carefully chosen. "I had a crush on him once, you know. Back when we first started at UA." Mei blinked, slightly surprised, though she didn't interrupt. Ochako continued, her voice growing more reflective. "It was a simple crush. Nothing special, really. He was kind, and he always tried his best, so I couldn't help but admire him. But, as time went on, and I got to know him better, I realized something." Mei listened intently, the hint of surprise still lingering on her face. "The more I got to know him," Ochako admitted, "the more I saw him as a really good friend. Someone I trust and care about deeply, but in a different way. I realized I didn't love him the way I thought I did." She glanced at Mei with a small, wistful smile. "But, I guess that's why, when I saw you with him, I felt jealous. At first, anyway." Mei's eyes widened in genuine surprise. "Jealous of me?" Ochako nodded, her gaze softening. "Yeah, I mean, I didn't even realize it at first. You're so direct, so fearless when it comes to your feelings. It made me realize that I had to confront my own emotions." She chuckled lightly. "But now that I see how much you care about him, I feel like I can let go of whatever little feelings I had left." Mei was quiet for a moment, absorbing Ochako's confession. She wasn't used to these kinds of heart-to-heart conversations, but she could tell that Ochako was being honest with her. After a pause, Mei spoke, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "I had no idea. I thought you were just a rival." Ochako smiled warmly at Mei's bluntness. "No, not a rival. Not anymore." She placed a comforting hand on Mei's shoulder, her gaze full of sincerity. "Hold on to him, okay? And protect him, in ways that I can't. Deku's a strong person, but he needs someone who understands him, who can support him in more intimate ways than I ever will." A small, appreciative smile tugged at Mei's lips. "I will. I'll make sure to protect him, and love him." "That's all I could ever ask for," Ochako replied with a fond smile. As they reached the entrance lobby, Mei's heart skipped a beat when she spotted Izuku waiting for them. He stood there, shifting slightly on his feet as he often did, a simple expression of concern on his face. To others, he might seem plain, just another boy in a sea of aspiring heroes, but to Mei, he was absolutely perfect. Her stomach did flips, and she unconsciously adjusted her hair, feeling a rush of excitement. He wasn't just another project or puzzle to solve anymore. He was someone she cared for, deeply. Someone she wanted to be with. Ochako greeted Izuku first, her voice light and friendly. "Hey, Deku, I'll go check on the cab, so I'll be right back." She waved to the two of them before stepping outside, leaving Mei and Izuku standing there in the quiet lobby. An awkward silence hung in the air between them for a moment, both of them unsure of what to say. Mei felt her nerves bubbling up, her heart pounding in her chest as she recalled all the tips the girls had given her about talking to someone you liked. Finally, unable to hold it in any longer, Mei blurted out, "You're looking really good today, Izuku. I mean, you always look good, but today especially. Your hair, your face, everything." Her voice was overly enthusiastic, but she didn't care. Izuku's eyes widened, his face instantly flushing a deep shade of red. He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly flustered by her sudden praise. I mean, thank you. I'm not used to compliments like that." He fumbled with his words, looking away shyly as his cheeks continued to burn. Mei smiled, satisfied with her work. The tips had worked, sort of. Watching him get all bashful and embarrassed was more than she could have hoped for. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes gleaming with affection. It's just the truth, you know. Izuku glanced back at her, still blushing but offering a small, genuine smile in return. The warmth in his eyes made Mei's heart flutter even more. And in that moment, she felt just a little bit closer to him. Kneeling down in front of Mei, his emerald eyes locked onto hers with a seriousness she hadn't seen in him before. Mei's cheeks flushed instantly, her heart pounding as his proximity sent waves of warmth through her. She smiled nervously, trying to hold herself together, but the anticipation was overwhelming. Then, Izuku gave her a soft, warm smile, one that reached his eyes and melted any remaining tension in the air. He began to speak, his voice low and sincere. "I've had time to think it through," he said, his gaze never leaving hers. Mei's breath hitched, her heart thundering in her chest, waiting for his next words. "I've always wanted to focus on being a hero," Izuku continued, his tone thoughtful, almost as if he was speaking to himself. "Because that was all I ever knew. Nothing else mattered to me. Nothing else could matter. I was so determined, so focused on that dream." He glanced away for a brief second, as if gathering his thoughts before looking back at her. "But UA changed everything," he said quietly. "It gave me the opportunity to chase my dream. But it also gave me friends, people who supported me when I thought I couldn't keep going. And it also gave me the blessing of meeting you." Mei's heart skipped a beat, and her entire world seemed to narrow down to just the two of them in that moment. Izuku's expression softened as he continued, his voice gentle. "I'll admit, I'm just as clueless about love as you probably are," he said, a small chuckle escaping his lips. "But there's one thing I know for sure, I want to learn more about it. And I'd love to experience it alongside you." Mei's heart exploded with joy, her mind spinning as his words sunk in. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. Her eyes widened, and in a high-pitched voice, almost too excited to contain herself, she blurted, "So, does that mean you've accepted me?" Izuku smiled again, that warm, kind smile that had melted her heart so many times before. "Yeah," he replied softly, his eyes shining with sincerity. "I think it's time for us to head back to the dorms, together." Mei's face lit up like never before, her heart soaring as she realized that this was really happening. Still bound to her wheelchair, Mei's excitement bubbled over, and she instinctively tried to stand. But before she could even manage to get up, Izuku leaned forward, gently placing his hands on the arms of her chair to stop her. Without a word, their eyes locked, and something passed between them, an unspoken understanding, a connection they both had been building up to for so long. Slowly, with no hesitation, they leaned toward each other, the world fading around them. Their lips lined up perfectly, and in a soft, tender moment, they connected in their first shared kiss. It was gentle, filled with all the emotions they hadn't been able to express until now. Time seemed to stop, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. Mei's heart fluttered wildly, and Izuku, despite his nerves, felt a warmth that wrapped around both of them. When they finally pulled away, both of their faces were flushed, breathless and filled with quiet, shared joy. Mei took a moment to savor the raw, unfamiliar sensation, her eyes sparkling with delight. A wide grin spread across her face as she finally exclaimed, "Niece." Her excitement was contagious, and both of them burst into laughter, their joy echoing through the quiet hospital lobby. As their laughter faded, they were left smiling at each other, a new bond formed between them, stronger than ever before. Mei and Izuku have been dating for weeks now, and it had been nothing short of perfection for the both of them. Their chemistry was undeniable, with their personalities effortlessly blending together in a way that felt natural and right. Izuku's calm, thoughtful nature balanced out Mei's eccentric energy, while her passion and creativity fueled his own ambitions as a hero. They had fallen into a rhythm that felt as if they had always been together. For Mei, her creative slump had finally lifted, and her workshop was buzzing with new inventions. With Izuku around, she was even more energetic than usual, her mind constantly sparking with fresh ideas for new gadgets to help him and their friends. Despite her lack of understanding about certain aspects of being in a romantic relationship, Mei found the process of learning alongside Izuku to be an exciting and fun adventure. Each new experience, whether it was a simple date, a quiet moment together, or figuring out how to navigate their feelings, became an opportunity for growth, and Mei loved every second of it. Izuku, in turn, was patient and understanding, just as fascinated by the journey they were taking together. It was a relationship full of joy, discovery, and support, and neither of them would have had it any other way. Mei cherished every single moment they spent together. Just the thought of knowing that Izuku was hers made her day exponentially better. Every time they held hands, hugged, or shared a kiss, it felt as though her life force surged with newfound energy. Her heart was constantly fueled by the warmth of his exclusive love, a feeling that was exhilarating and comforting all at once. The simple act of being near him made her days brighter, her mind sharper, and her motivation boundless. Each kiss was like a spark that reignited her creativity, and every hug felt like a protective shield, wrapping her in warmth. For Mei, Izuku wasn't just a boyfriend, he was her muse, her partner in life, and the source of an endless well of joy that made her heart race with excitement. She smiled more, laughed more, and even found herself more driven than ever. Being with Izuku made her feel like she could conquer anything. Every invention, every challenge, every dream felt possible, as long as he was by her side. Thanks to Izuku, Mei began to open up and become more social. The girls from Class 1A were much more receptive to her quirks and eccentricities, and before she even realized it, Ochako had unknowingly become one of her closest friends and confidants. It was a new and unfamiliar path for Mei, but one she found herself enjoying, even if it was outside her comfort zone. Though her heart still belonged to her babies, her beloved inventions, she now made more time for the people around her, no longer content with just the solitude of her lab. Mei found herself chatting with the girls more often, laughing at Mina's jokes, and even sharing moments of technical curiosity with Momo. It was strange, in a good way, to have this new balance between work and friendship. Her life had expanded beyond gadgets and mechanics. While she remained fiercely dedicated to her craft, Mei had grown just a little more aware of the world outside her lab doors. She was still the mad scientist at heart, but now, she had friends, and, of course, Izuku, to share in the joy of it all. Mei's stab wound had fully healed, but the scar left behind was a constant reminder of the danger she'd faced. Toga's menacing words still echoed in her mind, leaving an unsettling weight she couldn't entirely shake. Whenever Mei thought back to that near-fatal encounter, a mix of fear and resolve stirred within her. She had promised Izuku she would never allow herself to be caught off guard again. The thought of being helpless, of not being able to protect herself or him, fueled a new fire within her. Mei began to focus her inventive genius on something more personal, creating defensive devices she could wear or carry at all times. It wasn't just about her inventions anymore. She wanted to be prepared, to be strong enough to defend herself and everything she had gained, including Izuku. If Toga ever dared to reappear in her life, Mei vowed to be ready. She would protect the life and love she'd built alongside Izuku, and nothing, not even Toga, would take that away from her. In her lab, Mei was completely absorbed in her work, fine-tuning Bakugo's explosive gauntlets while the hot-headed hero to be paced impatiently behind her. His scowling didn't faze her one bit, she was used to it by now. "Come on, Goggles, are you done yet?" Bakugo grumbled, crossing his arms. "Almost there. Just need to tweak the pressure regulator," Mei responded cheerfully, not looking up from her work. Bakugo rolled his eyes, then muttered under his breath, "How the hell did that Deku of all people manage to bag a girl? I'm still wrapping my head around that." Mei's hand paused for a brief second, then she resumed her tinkering. "Oh, you mean me?" she asked without turning around, her tone completely unbothered. "Who else, Goggles?" Bakugo replied, sounding genuinely bewildered. "It's just weird. I didn't think he had it in him. Are you either, for that matter? You're both nerds, just different types." Mei chuckled, a smirk forming on her face as she tightened a screw. "Yeah, I guess we are. But he's perfect, you know." Maybe that's why. Bakugo scoffed. Perfect, huh, sure. But don't expect him to save you from me if these gauntlets don't work properly, Goggles. Mei laughed at his usual threats. Don't worry, these babies will be just as explosive as you are, Bakugo. Maybe more. Yeah, whatever, Bakugo muttered, his impatience thinly veiling the faintest hint of amusement. Even he couldn't argue with the results Mei always delivered. As soon as Bakugo stormed out of her lab, Mei eagerly turned her attention to a different project, a more personal one. It was something she'd been working on ever since the attack by Toga, a specialized piece of tech designed to defend herself in case she was ever caught off guard again. She wasn't going to be helpless next time. Just as she was about to dive into the modifications, the door creaked open. Izuku stepped in, holding a small bag in his hand. Hey, Mei, brought you a snack. Before he could finish, Mei spun around in her chair and leapt into his arms, pulling him into a tight hug. Izu, she exclaimed, her face lighting up. She clung to him like she hadn't seen him in days, even though it had only been a few hours. Izuku smiled warmly, returning the embrace as best as he could without dropping the bag. Whoa, you seem energetic today. He chuckled, setting the bag down on the nearest table. I always am when you show up, she teased, squeezing him a little tighter before finally letting go. What did you bring me? Izuku pulled out a small box from the bag. Just some of your favorite snacks. Thought you might need a break. Mei grinned, her heart swelling at the simple gesture. You're the best. She quickly grabbed the box and sat back at her workbench, opening it and munching away. Izuku watched her, a little curious about the scattered blueprints and parts. What are you working on now? He asked, stepping closer to examine the mess of schematics. Mei's expression shifted slightly, a more serious tone taking over. It's a new project. For me, you know, just in case something like the Toga incident happens again. Izuku's smile faded, and he frowned with concern. Mei. She waved him off. Don't worry, it's nothing crazy, just something to help me defend myself. I promised you, right? I won't let myself get caught off guard like that again. Izuku sighed, still looking worried, but he trusted her. He knelt beside her, his hand gently resting on her arm. Just be careful, okay? I don't want to see you hurt again. Mei turned and gave him a soft smile. I will, and hey, you'll be there to save me if things go wrong, right? Always, Izuku promised, squeezing her arm lightly. He wrapped his arms around Mei from behind, pulling her close and resting his chin gently on her shoulder. Mei's heart fluttered as she leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his embrace. It was moments like these that made everything feel so right. I love you, Mei, he whispered softly, his breath warm against her ear. Mei smiled, her eyes closing as she let herself sink into the moment. I know, she murmured back, her voice soft and filled with affection. I love you too. They stayed like that, quiet and content, the world around them fading away as they shared this intimate embrace. It wasn't about the words anymore, just the simple act of being together, feeling each other's presence, and knowing that no matter what, they had each other. Izuku smiled as he leaned in, placing a gentle kiss on her cheek. How about we go grab some lunch? Just the two of us, he suggested. Mei blinked, weighing the prospect of lunch against her long list of projects. But the babies, she mumbled, glancing at her workbench full of half-finished inventions. Izuku chuckled at her typical thought process. They'll be fine. You can take a break, right? Plus, I promise they won't go anywhere. She tilted her head, her internal debate visible on her face, but his smile and the warmth of his touch swayed her. Fine, she finally relented, a playful glint in her eye. I guess I can push back a few projects, for you. She quickly planted a kiss on his cheek in return, earning another chuckle from him. Deal, let's go. With that, Mei eagerly set her tools aside, ready for some time away from the lab, and with him. Izuku led Mei to a quaint little coffee spot just outside of UA, one that Momo had highly recommended. As they sat down, Mei had to chuckle to herself. If it hadn't been for Ochako's reminder, she would have shown up in her usual grease-stained shirt, completely oblivious to fashion. She wasn't used to dressing up, but Ochako had made sure she looked nice, even if Mei found it all a bit fussy. Izuku placed their order. He got a latte, and for her, a mocha, which she happily accepted with a wide smile. I don't get why people care about how we dress, she mused, sipping her drink. As long as I'm comfy and can work on my babies, that's all that matters. Izuku smiled warmly, shaking his head slightly. It's about balance, I guess. And, you look great today, Mei. She blushed at his compliment, her mind already shifting away from the whole fashion ordeal. Thanks. I only care because it's with you, she admitted with a grin, taking another sip of her mocha. Mei had settled on a clean gray sleeveless shirt paired with a knee-length black skirt, still rocking her trusty work boots and, of course, her signature goggles. The outfit somehow struck a balance between her practical nature and a stylish aesthetic that suited her perfectly. Izuku couldn't take his eyes off her as she happily sipped her mocha, the sunlight filtering in through the cafe's windows, casting a soft glow on her. She caught him staring and smirked. What, you checking out your girlfriend, Midoriya? She teased, leaning forward slightly. Izuku blushed, scratching the back of his neck. I can't help it, he admitted, his voice soft. You look amazing, Mei. Mei grinned proudly, setting her cup down. Well, good, I'm glad you're appreciating the effort. But next time, I'm showing up in my lab gear. She winked at him, making him laugh as they continued to enjoy their quiet moment together. After their coffee date, Izuku led Mei to a nearby park for a peaceful walk. As they strolled along the path, Mei pouted, clearly wanting to get back to her lab and continue working on her babies. But Izuku, with a knowing smile, enacted what he called boyfriend intervention, making sure she stayed out of the lab for the rest of the day. Mei crossed her arms and huffed. You're conspiring with the others, aren't you? Ochako, Momo, they're all plotting to keep me from my work. Izuku chuckled, gently pulling her closer by the waist. Maybe, but you're always cooped up in there. I just want you to enjoy the world a bit more, outside of your lab. It's important to take breaks, and besides, he glanced at her with a fond smile, I love spending time with you. She sighed dramatically but couldn't hide the smile creeping up on her lips. Fine, but only because I love being around you, too. This better be worth missing out on my projects, she teased, leaning into him as they continued walking. Izuku smiled, happy to see her relaxing. He knew it wasn't easy for her to break out of her solitary, non-sociable habits, but with his help, along with the girls of 1A, Mei was slowly beginning to embrace a bit of balance in her life, though she'd always be the mad inventor he adored. Hand in hand, Mei and Izuku strolled through the park, their conversation flowing naturally as always. Mei excitedly rambled on about her latest invention, describing every intricate detail with uncontainable enthusiasm. It's a fully automated gear system with a built-in feedback loop. Once it detects a malfunction, it self-repairs. Can you imagine the potential? Izuku listened with bright eyes, nodding along as he absorbed her technical talk, even if some of it flew over his head. That's amazing, Mei. You could revolutionize support equipment with something like that. In return, he dove into his own passion, recounting the latest pro-hero news and analyzing their quirks and hawks. He can control each of his feathers independently, it's incredible. He's so fast in the air, it's like he's always one step ahead of the villains. Mei grinned. I bet I could build something that would boost his speed even more. Imagine if he had a flight stabilizer attached to his back. Their conversation effortlessly flowed between support tech and hero strategies, their shared passion for their respective fields making for endless, engaging discussions. The way their hobbies aligned so perfectly brought them closer, creating a unique bond that only they seemed to understand. Mei couldn't help but marvel at the shift within herself. All her life, her lab and her inventions had been everything. Her babies were her purpose, the driving force behind every decision she made. But now, as she walked with Izuku, laughing and exchanging ideas, she realized how effortlessly her priorities had shifted. It amazed her how easily she was swayed from her lifelong dedication to her work by the simple, yet profound act of falling in love. I never thought I'd want to do anything other than invent, Mei admitted, glancing at him with a small smile. But being with you, Izuku, it's like I've found something else just as important. Maybe even more. Izuku squeezed her hand, his own smile warm and reassuring. I feel the same way, Mei. You've brought so much joy into my life too. And just like that, Mei felt at peace, knowing that her world had expanded beyond her machines, and it was all thanks to this teenage boy who had stolen her heart. Mei, feeling playful, leaned in and planted a series of kisses on Izuku's cheeks, one after another, each filled with affection. Izuku, ever the bashful one when it came to public displays of affection, blushed furiously but smiled at her enthusiasm. Come on, Izuku, she pouted, giving him an exaggerated look of disappointment. You're always holding back. Gimme some kisses in return. He hesitated for a moment, glancing around nervously, but her wide, expectant eyes were hard to resist. Sighing in playful defeat, he leaned in, gently pressing his lips to hers in a sweet, tender kiss. The moment lingered, and despite his usual shyness, Izuku felt more confident, returning her affection with sincerity. There, he murmured softly, smiling at her, his face still tinged with a light blush. Happy now? Mei beamed, her heart fluttering. Very, she said, leaning into him, enjoying the closeness and not minding a bit that they were out in public. She loved how Izuku was slowly coming out of his shell with her, and she was more than happy to pull him along the way. As Mei and Izuku continued their walk, they spotted Denki and Kyoka up ahead on the trail. Denki was sitting on the ground, panting heavily and looking utterly drained from the run, while Kyoka leaned down, resting her hands on her knees, catching her breath but looking far less fatigued than her partner. The couple approached them, pleased to have bumped into them. Hey, look who it is! Denki exclaimed between breaths, waving as soon as he spotted them. Lovebirds on a stroll. Kyoka rolled her eyes but smirked. Hi, you two, she said, standing up straight and wiping some sweat from her brow. You guys out for a walk? Izuku smiled warmly at the sight of their classmates. Yeah, just enjoying the day, he replied. What about you two? Training? Denki dramatically flopped onto his back. Jiro's idea, he groaned. I'm dying, man. Kyoka crossed her arms, smirking down at him. You wanted to get better at keeping up in physical stuff, remember? This is part of it. Mei giggled, leaning closer to Izuku. Looks like we're not the only ones having fun outside today. Izuku chuckled, nodding. It's good to see everyone pushing themselves, though, he added, giving Denki an encouraging smile. Denki waved his hand in defeat. Yeah, I'll catch up, in like 5 hours. Kyoka tilted her head, looking at Mei and Izuku with a raised eyebrow. So, you two got any plans for the weekend? Mina's been trying to set up an evening hangout in downtown. You two in? Izuku scratched the back of his head, thinking. I've got a few assignments to finish up, but I could probably make it if Mei's interested. Mei, however, looked a bit hesitant, her mind still buzzing with unfinished projects back at the lab. I don't know. I'm kinda behind on some schematics and upgrades for my babies. You know how it is. Kyoka leaned in, nudging her with a teasing smile. Come on, you can't just live in the lab forever. It'll be fun to get out, hang out with the rest of us, and unwind for a bit. Izuku gave her a supportive smile, gently squeezing her hand. You've been working really hard lately. Maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea to take a little break. Mei pouted slightly, torn between her love for tinkering and spending more time with her friends, and especially Izuku. Well, I guess I have been working a lot, she admitted, glancing at Kyoka. You're really sure it'll be fun? Kyoka grinned. Trust me, you'll have a blast. Mei tilted her head, giving Kyoka a curious look. So, your boyfriend, she said, nodding at Denki, who was still lying on the ground catching his breath, is he coming with you? Kyoka's face instantly flushed, and she stammered, he's not my boyfriend. Her voice cracked slightly, betraying her embarrassment. She crossed her arms, looking away. Mei frowned in confusion, clearly having trouble processing Kyoka's denial. But I thought you two were a couple. You have the same aesthetic, your quirks are pretty compatible, and you both like music and stuff. Plus, your personalities match perfectly. Mei continued her analysis, nodding to herself. The data seems pretty solid in my head. Kyoka's face turned an even deeper shade of red, her voice barely above a whisper as she muttered, "It's not like that." Izuku scratched the back of his neck awkwardly, stepping in. Sorry about that, Jiro. Mei just has a unique way of looking at things," he said, offering a small, apologetic smile. Meanwhile, Denki finally got back on his feet, wiping sweat from his forehead. "What are you guys talking about?" Kyoka shot him a glare and immediately shut him down before he could dig further into the conversation. "Nothing. Just stop talking." She still couldn't look him in the eye, her cheeks glowing as if she had absorbed too much of his electricity. Mei watched them carefully, her analytical mind working. She leaned toward Izuku and whispered, "I'm still sure they have a high percentage of strong compatibility." Izuku chuckled nervously, trying to defuse the situation. "Why yeah, maybe, but let's, not push them, okay?" As Kyoka and Denki jogged away, still flustered by the conversation, Mei turned to Izuku with a playful glint in her eyes. Before he could react, she hopped onto his back, wrapping her arms around his neck with a mischievous grin. "Carry me, like a good boyfriend should," she demanded, her voice full of playful affection. Izuku, surprised for a second, let out a soft chuckle and adjusted his grip, holding her steady. All right, he said, smiling warmly as he began walking again. Mei snuggled against his back, her face beaming with joy. With her resting on his back, the two strolled through the park in silence for a moment, the only sound being the breeze and distant chatter. Mei's heart swelled with happiness, feeling safe and cherished. Being carried by him was not just playful, it was a reminder of how much she loved being close to him, in every way possible. "You're too good to me," she whispered, resting her chin on his shoulder, her smile never fading. Izuku blushed lightly but smiled back. "I just want to make you happy, Mei." "You do, always," she murmured, tightening her hold around him as they continued their walk together, perfectly content in each other's presence. With the weekend approaching, Momo and Ochako decided it was the perfect time to take Mei shopping. Mei, however, was completely oblivious to fashion, much more interested in tech and gadgets than clothing. But the girls were determined to help her look great, not just for the evening hangout, but especially for Izuku. "Mei, you can't wear grease-stained clothes every time you go out with him," Ochako teased as they entered a trendy boutique. Mei, with her goggles still on her head, scratched her cheek in confusion. "But they're comfortable, and I like how functional they are." Momo chuckled, placing a hand on Mei's shoulder. "We'll help you find something just as comfortable, but maybe a bit more stylish. You want to impress Izuku, right?" Mei blinked, then shrugged. "I don't think he minds what I wear, but, if it'll make him happy, I'll give it a shot." The trio moved through the racks of clothes, Momo and Ochako pulling out different outfits and holding them up to Mei, who looked less than thrilled at first. But after a while, she began to see the fun in it, especially when Momo explained the practical side of some of the outfits. "Think of it like building one of your babies, Mei," Momo said with a smile. "You're creating a new look for a new experience." That finally got Mei's attention. Okay, I get it. This is like crafting an outfit that maximizes efficiency and appeal. Alright, I'm in." Momo, the undeniable fashionista of the trio, was in her element. She pulled out dozens of outfits, from casual chic to elegant evening wear, mixing and matching tops, skirts, dresses, and accessories with the precision of an artist at work. Mei, still out of her depth, simply went with the flow, emerging from the dressing room in a new outfit every few minutes. "This one's a bit tight," Mei commented, stepping out in a form-fitting blouse paired with slim jeans. Momo tilted her head, inspecting her carefully. It does highlight your figure nicely," Momo mused, tapping her chin thoughtfully. "But maybe something a bit more relaxed would suit you better." Ochako, meanwhile, was waiting outside the dressing rooms, amusing herself by browsing the store's more expensive items. She marveled at the price tags, playfully sighing over the things she couldn't afford. "Geez, how does Momo shop here so casually?" she muttered under her breath, eyeing a beautiful designer bag. Mei emerged again, this time in a more casual outfit, a loose-fitting, oversized sweater with leggings. She immediately smiled, spinning around for Momo and Ochako to see. This feels nice. That looks adorable, Ochako called from across the room. Izuku will love it. Momo nodded approvingly. It's comfortable, and it still looks stylish. I think we've found a winner for one of your outfits. She then smiled mischievously. But we're not done yet. Mei groaned. There's more. As Mei stood in the dressing room, pulling off the sweater she had just tried on, Momo glanced at her figure, her eyes briefly lingering on her chest before offering a casual compliment. You know, Mei, you have a really nice figure. We're about the same size, Momo said, her tone friendly but slightly bashful. Mei, tilting her head in confusion, asked, same size. Is that important? Momo's cheeks flushed as she realized the direction her comment had taken. Well, some guys, you know, they like that sort of thing. Mei raised an eyebrow, still puzzled. Like what? Momo stammered, trying to regain her composure. I mean, some boys pay attention to that, too, you know, chest size. Mei blinked, still confused. Does Izuku care about that? Momo quickly waved her hands, embarrassed. I don't know. It's not something every guy cares about, but it's something people mention sometimes. I'm sure Izuku likes you for all of you. Mei shrugged, not really understanding the fuss. If you say so, but I'm more concerned with how he likes my inventions, not my boob size. Momo laughed nervously. Right, of course. That's the important part. With their shopping bags in hand, the trio walked out of the store, Momo and Ochako chatting happily about their purchases. Mei, however, was still a bit distracted, glancing down at her new clothes, still not entirely used to dressing up for special occasions. But the thought of doing it for Izuku made her willing to push through the unfamiliarity. As they continued walking, Mei glanced at Ochako with a curious look. Are you sure you're not coming this weekend? She asked. Ochako shook her head, smiling. Nah, I've got some different plans. But you all will have a blast. Mei tilted her head, still unsure. So, who exactly is gonna be there again? Momo chimed in, adjusting the bags she was carrying. It's going to be you, me, Mina, Jiro, Kaminari, Kirishima, Todoroki, and Midoriya. Mei did a quick mental count, then her eyes lit up. Wait. That's an equal number of boys and girls. Is this a couple's date night? Momo chuckled, waving it off. No, it's nothing like that. We're all just friends hanging out. No pressure, just fun. Still, Mei couldn't help but ponder over the numbers again. It's just, with the way everyone's paired up, it kind of feels like one. Momo smiled, brushing off the concern. Trust me, Mei, it's just a casual get-together. No hidden couple agendas. Mei gave a slow nod, though the thought still lingered in the back of her mind. She wasn't entirely convinced it wasn't a date night of some kind, but if Momo said it wasn't, then she would try not to overthink it. Besides, if Izuku was there, she figured she'd have a good time regardless of what the night held. Mei couldn't help herself as her mind continued to race. But seriously, don't you guys think Jiro and Sparky have a really strong compatibility? She asked, using her nickname for Kaminari. Momo and Ochako exchanged a knowing look, both clearly having thought the same at some point. Ochako gave a soft laugh, maybe, but let them figure it out. It's best not to intrude. Mei shrugged, still deep in thought, but quickly shifted her focus to her own situation. She glanced down at the clothes Momo had helped her pick out, then asked aloud, do you think Izuku will find me extra attractive in this? Ochako smiled warmly, absolutely, Mei. He already adores you, so with those clothes, you'll knock him out. Momo nodded in agreement, you're going to look stunning. And knowing how much he cares about you, he'll be over the moon no matter what you wear. Mei grinned, feeling her excitement grow. I hope so. I mean, he's already seen me covered in grease and sweat, so this is a whole new experiment. The girls laughed, the mood lightening as they reassured Mei that she would undoubtedly catch Izuku's eye that night. I still don't get all this fashion stuff, Mei muttered to herself as they walked. But if it's for him, I guess it's worth trying. Momo smiled warmly. Trust me, Mei, You'll look amazing, and Izuku will definitely notice. Ochako added, yeah, and it's fun to try something different now and then. Mei nodded, though her mind was still on the odd conversation from earlier. She couldn't shake the curiosity about what Momo had said. Her inventions were always a priority, but now there was this new layer of her relationship with Izuku that was unfamiliar territory for her. As they continued walking, Mei thought to herself, maybe I should just ask him directly. He's always honest with me. Yeah, I'll just ask Izuku what he thinks about beeps. That makes sense, right? To be continued. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.